Welcome, wanderers, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV, where the storm isn't just outside your window, it's crawling through your speakers tonight. We've unearthed a collection of bone-chilling tales, each one clawing its way to the surface under the veil of relentless rain and thunder that doesn't soothe. If these stories burrow under your skin, don't just shiver. Smash that subscribe button and let the algorithm know you're brave enough to stay. I want to hear where you're hiding. Drop your city and a candle emoji in the comments if you dare. Now, lock your doors, steady your pulse, and let's wander deeper into the abyss where these horrors fester. The parasite, the damned skeeter. That's all I could think as I slapped at the red, itchy welt on my forearm. There were blood-sucking bastards, of course, but this one seemed different. More insistent, somehow. The itch was maddening, deep, and burrowing, the kind that no amount of scratching could relieve. A couple of days later, the welt was hard, like a mosquito bite, infected, tiny pimple. I shrugged it off. Most likely just an allergic reaction. LL, the anti-itch cream, and a Band-Aid became my new BFFs. But the itch wouldn't go away, and then something else began to happen. A throbbing, a dull, steady thud that seemed to resonate with the lump and radiate down my arm. Then, a week later, the bite I noticed. The lump, under my skin, hard and smooth, marble-sized. Panic fluttered in my chest. A cyst? A tumor? I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Dubois, my GP, hoping for a benign explanation. Dubois studied me, with no small amount of concern on his brow. "It's an unusual thing," he said, poking the lump with a practiced hand. "Too deep to be a mere cyst. We are going to need some imaging. I'm planning a biopsy, too, just to be on the safe side." Safe. That word rang in my mind, empty and devoid of meaning. It was excruciating waiting for the results. Sleep deserted me, replaced by a feverish anxiety and the persistent throbbing in my arm. Each day, the lump seemed to get larger. Then came the nightmares. Nightmares of writhing insects and pulsating sacs, and dread. I'd awake screaming, bathed in sweat, the itching in my arm heightened to a torturous pain. One night, I woke from one such nightmare gasping, my heart banging against my ribs. The room was silent but for the hum of the air conditioner. But then I heard it, a low voice whispering in a way that seemed imagined. "Almost ready." I shot upright, glaring into the pitch black. Am I going crazy? Stress? The perennial anxiety finally breaking my sanity? I chalked it up to a hallucination, a figment of my sleep-deprived brain. But the following night, it murmured once more. An octave higher, a bit clearer this time. Almost ready to hatch. My blood ran cold. It wasn't inside my head. It was coming from the lump. I put my fingers against my arm and could feel the hard, smooth surface under my skin. Now there was a more distinct throb, a rhythmic surge. I got out of bed groggily and rushed to the bathroom. I looked into the mirror and saw myself, pale and haggard, my eyes big with fear. With great reluctance, I pulled the Band-Aid off, exposing the horrific mess beneath it. It was larger than I recalled, pushing against my skin, stretching it to a translucent sheen. And then I saw it, a flicker of motion, a slight disturbance under the water. Something was alive inside. I took my tweezers from the medicine cabinet. The tremor in my hands was barely to be believed. I had to get it out. Now, forget the biopsy, forget Dr. Dubois, forget the reason. This was a primal terror, a last-ditch battle for survival. Ignoring the burst of searing pain that shot up my arm, I plunged the tweezers into the stretching skin. I felt a woozy resistance, a slick surface slipping out from under the pinchers. And then, in one last painful yank, I pulled. What emerged was an insect, sort of. It was a fleshy, bulbous thing, pale and glistening, its translucent skin streaked with a web of black veins pulsing beneath. From its smooth, featureless head, one unblinking, I looked up into my face. It throbbed, a slow, rhythmic pulse, and then, with a sinewy, squelching sound, the eye parted, and a small, talon-like protrusion extruded from within, reaching out and clawing blindly for something to hold on to. Terror paralyzed me. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. The thing was still connected, like a fleshy umbilical cord anchoring it to the wound. It squirmed in my hand, its singular eye studying me with an unsettling wisdom. "Almost ready," it said, its voice a high-pitched insectal whine. "Almost ready to hatch." The news landed on me like a fist. It wasn't just growing. It was developing, maturing. It was nearly there, ready to explode out fully formed. And then what? What would it do? What was it? Desperation clawed at me. I had to kill it. I had to get it dead before it was too late. I grabbed the first thing I saw, a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Then I poured it on the thing, soaking it in the stinging fluid. It didn't even flinch. The clawed appendage continued to reach, its grasping tendril tightening about the fleshy cusp of the wound. I reached for a lighter, my hand shaking so badly I could hardly keep it steady. I flipped it on, and a tiny flame flickered in the air. I was rendered breathless, my throat seized. This was it. No going back. I roasted the sucker, and when it caught fire, an alcohol-licked blue inferno. It shrieked a high-pitched, skull-piercing sound that echoed in my skull. The muscular appendage writhed, spasming in the fire. The stench was horrible, a mix of burning flesh and something ancient, alien. And then, just as abruptly as it began, it ended. The flames subsided, revealing a black, smoking shell. The umbilical cord, which clung to my arm, dried up and turned black. I looked at the remains, my body shaking, my mind spinning. Was it dead? Was it truly gone? With the rest of the alcohol, I cauterized the wound. The pain was a welcome reprieve from the recent horror. I wrapped my arm in bandages, whatever that pounding had been now a dull ache. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know where it came from. All I know is that it was within me, crawling, feeding, waiting to emerge into the world. And I killed it. But the nightmares have not gone away. Every night, I dream of that single, unblinking eye, staring at me with the cold, reptilian intelligence. And sometimes immediately, as I'm waking up, there's the quietest whisper, almost inaudible voice, from my own brain. Not quite ready. The final page. The antique shop smelled like dust and regret, an appropriate odor for the treasures it harbored. I browsed, as I do always, attracted to the leather-bound journals hunched, haphazard, on a back shelf. I'm a writer, a collector of stories, and these books, sitting quietly on strangers' shelves, always promise untold narratives. One, its deep, unsettling maroon cover practically humming with some invisible power. I had to have it. At home, bathed under the warm glow of my desk lamp, I opened it. The yellowing pages were brittle, filled with looping, elegant script written in fading ink. The earliest was dated 1888. It described a commonplace morning, a missed train, a spilled cup of tea. Then, the concluding line, "I died today." A chill prickled my skin. I flipped to the next page. Another day, another string of small events. A walk in the park, a conversation with a neighbor, the scent of honeysuckle on the air. And then, the bone-chilling refrain, "I died today." I read the journal hard, page by page. The writer, a woman named Eliza, walked us through her life, threading detail upon detail, only to end every entry with that one chilling sentence. Other deaths were implied, a mysterious illness or an untimely accident. Others were completely left to the imagination. And then the entries got weirder and weirder. Eliza wrote of monstrous figures waiting in shadow, of whispers among the trees, of the sickening sensation of being watched. The banal particulars of her life took on an air of dread. The honeysuckle grew oppressive, the neighbors' smiles predatory, the shadows sentient. And always, the brutal, inescapable thumbnail, "I died today." Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. The journal consumed me. I looked up 1888, hoping to find even a mention of Eliza, a reason for this macabre chronicle. I found nothing. Days bled into nights. I reread the journal, looking for a pattern, a clue, any little something that would unlock the mystery of Eliza and the cycle of her repeated murder. Was she insane? a fantasist, or was something much more sinister afoot? The later entries became increasingly shorter and more frantic, but the descriptions grew more incoherent, more fragmented, interspersed with desperate pleas. Eliza wrote of an encroaching darkness, a presence closing in, smothering her, and, as ever, the finality, "I died today." By then, the entries had started to jump. Weeks stretched into months, then years. The handwriting grew shaky, nearly illegible. My last entry, before I turned the page to my final page, was a single trembling sentence. "It's coming for me. I died today." My heart quickened as I read the final page. It was blank, stark white against the yellowed paper of the previous pages. Relief surged through me, a shaky belief that the nightmare was finally over. But then I noticed it, for words scribbled there, in the lower right corner, in my handwriting, the ink always a little damp. "I died today," I gasped, recoiling and flinging the journal across the room. I gasped, a scream rising in my throat. My handwriting? How? I hadn't jotted anything down in the journal. I hadn't even laid a hand on it in hours. Panic seized me. I recoiled, losing my footing on a wayward rug. As I fell, my head hit the sharp edge of my desk with a sickening thud. Darkness bloomed at the fringes of my vision. I was lying there, panting for breath, my pain head. As consciousness faded further, I saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room coalesced into a vaguely human shape. It was indistinct, blurry, but those empty eyes, they were focused on me. I heard a whisper in my ear, a voice like mine but not mine. "I died today." The darkness consumed me. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Minutes? Hours? When I awoke, I was on the floor, my head throbbing. The journal was close at hand, its maroon cover glinting ominously in the dim light. I shrugged it up, fingers shaking. I had to know. I turned to the last page, half expecting to find another entry, another statement of my death. It was still there. My handwriting, stark and undeniable. "I died today." But something had changed. Below my words, in the same faded ink as the rest of the journal, there was now a new line. "And so did I." Most terrifying, a wave of clarity broke over me. Eliza was not just writing about her death. She was recording mine. This was not a journal. It was a trap, a cyclical curse passed through unwitting readers, each entry a link in a chain, tethering us to Eliza's interminable agony. I glanced around the room as if it had eyes, a chill piercing my bones. Eliza was still here, imprisoned within the pages, within the very fibers of the journal. And now so was I. The cycle was complete. Or was it? I had to break it. But how? Could I destroy the journal? Would that free us both? Or simply imprison us in oblivion? And there was only one way to find out. I picked up the pen that had been sitting next to the journal, the same one I always used. I was faltering, my fingers shaking. Then, I took a deep breath and wrote one last line on the page. "I refuse to die today. The Church of Shadows." Hope cats have 9 lives because they say curiosity killed the cat. I've always sneered at that joke and thought of it as a cudgel for dullards to use in explaining why they didn't venture out. Now, on the edge of something frightening, I get the cat. It is my curiosity, a profound need to understand the unexplainable, that has brought me here to this place, the Church of Shadows. It's a ruin. Ornate stonework eroded to something that looks delicate but is worn slick after years of dry moss and ivy attack. The stained glass windows broken long ago, replaced by cavernous spaces that whistle sad songs in the wind. Natives in the adjacent village of Hollow Creek steer clear of it like the plague, whispering about midnight masses and unholy ceremonies. Well, that's what drew me in. I'm a paranormal investigator, or at least I used to be. As of late, I have felt more like a ghost hunter tracking the remnants of my better self, longing for a case that would remind me of my passion. Hollow Creek seemed like a promising tinderbox. An empty church, a past buried in rumors of dark arts, and a town genuinely spooked? Jackpot. I came a week ago, moving into the decaying inn. The villagers, initially guarded, relaxed their tongues after a couple of pints of the local ale. They talked about a congregation that didn't leave the church, even when the bishop disappeared and the parish shrank. They'd said the Church of Shadows could still be found holding its midnight services under the cover of the new moon. A thrill of anticipation battled with skepticism. I knew I needed to see it for myself. Tonight was the night. Armed with flashlight, audio recorder, and healthy fear, I approached the church as the grandfather clock in the village struck 12. It was thick, the air was heavy, ripe with the smell of damp soil and something else. Something pungent, metallic that made my stomach churn. Entering was like stepping over a threshold into another world. Moonlight slanted through the ruined window and colored the inside silver and black. It was dead silence, punctuated only by the panicked beating of my own heart. Then I heard it, a low growl that resonated through the floorboards into my bones. It heightened and merged into a chorus of moans and whispers. I squinted, straining to see through the gloom. And then I saw them. They were bodies, vague and trembling, huddled in the nave. They were wrapped in what looked like tattered robes, their faces obscured by shadow. They swayed to and fro, their humming rising in a crescendo to a succession of long plaintive wails. It was a screaming of pain, a hymn torn from the throats of the damned. I stood frozen in place, struck down by an inchoate fear that I had never felt before. This was not simple folklore or small-town superstition. This was something else, something old and vicious. Gradually, the figures started to face the altar. In the middle of the nave, a lone flickering candle lit a gruesome scene. The altar that had been the table of communion was now just a slab of cold stone, and upon it lay a body. My breath hitched, my blood ran cold. It was a corpse, gaunt and gray, its skin pulled tight against bone. But even in the low light, I could see it. The face, the gaunt features, the receding hairline. It was me. A strangled gasp left my mouth. The shapes turned their heads toward me, their dark forms moving and billowing like smoke. The chanting grew louder, turning into gut-wrenching screams that pounded inside my skull. I fell back, clawing for some potential safety from the paralyzing terror before me. My hand roamed for the door, though it felt miles away. The figures advanced towards me, their shadowy hands stretched out. Then one advanced, and in the low glow, I glimpsed a flash of recognition in its glazed pupils. The figure rasped, a voice like gravel on steel, "You're late." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned to run and stumbled through the broken door and out into the night. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs cried enough. I staggered back toward Hollow Creek until I fell on the hard-packed road. I don't know how long I lay there gasping for breath, my mind spinning. Finally, I got myself to my feet and stumbled back to the inn. I began to stuff my satchel, ignoring the innkeeper's accusing eyes. I didn't say a word. I just left. I have not stopped running since then. I can still picture the faces of the congregation, hear their mournful hymns, and feel the corpse's accusing gaze on the altar. I don't know what had come over me in that church, but I knew with absolute certainty I never wanted to see it again. The Church of Shadows is where the veil between worlds is thin, where the past, present, and future bleed together in a horrid tapestry of death and despair. Some mysteries are better off unsolved. Some doors are better left unopened. I learned that upside down and backward in the most frightening way possible. And now, I spend the hours between dusk and dawn beneath the gaze of my mortality as I stride the untamed backwoods of Hollow Creek, knowing the souls I am meant to protect are somewhere in these woods. And I know with cold certainty that one day I will be late no more. The midnight delivery. The welcome mat wore its years near the door. The porch light flickered long skeletal shadows over it. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hadn't had any orders in weeks. Lure of curiosity, that insidious whisper, pulled me toward the door. And there it was, a nondescript brown cardboard box. No sender address, only my name and address, written out in a stark, sterile font that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't the cold. New England in October was refreshingly brisk, not unmanageable. This was something different, a prickle of disquiet that seemed primordial and wrong. I paused, the box a mute finger of blame in my face. I dragged it inside against my better judgment. It was surprisingly heavy, the dynamism of its curves deceptive. I took a kitchen knife and cut through the packing tape. Inside, packed in shredded newspaper, was a jar. A simple glass mason jar, and it was full of teeth. Not in neat order, not filed, not tidied up. These were yellowed and stained, some chipped, some still bearing bits of gum tissue on the roots. Baby teeth, molars, canines. A gruesome archive of dental detritus. My stomach lurched. I pressed a hand over my mouth, wrestling the bile attempting to surface. Who would send such a thing? And why? I closed the lid back on the jar with a clang that echoed at the unnatural stillness of the house. I struggled to reconstruct all the rationales I could muster, and they all felt inadequate and silly. A prank? Some kind of sick joke? Felt personal, violating. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house, every rattle of leaves outside the window, sounded like footsteps, like someone coming closer. Towards dawn, I eventually fell asleep, worn out, my thoughts still spinning from the horrific contents of the jar. It was the knocking that began the following night. At first, it was subtle, a gentle tapping at the front door. I wrote it off as branches rubbing against the wood, something that happened fairly often during windstorms. But it continued, becoming more relentless by the minute. Ultimately, in a desperate blend of fear and rage, I snatched a heavy iron poker from the hearth and tiptoed to the entryway. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. Only darkness warped by the convex lens. I held my breath and listened closely. Silence. I fumbled to unbolt the door, holding on to the poker so tightly my knuckles ached. I swung the door open. Empty. Just the cold October air and the bony shadows thrown by the swinging porch light. I wanted to hope it was my imagination, a ghost of a frazzled mind. But as I began to shut the door, I heard it again. A low, gravelly voice, seemingly coming from the darkness itself. Return, what's ours? That voice spoke a bolt of absolute fear through my body. I closed the door behind me hard, fumbling to lock it. My heart pounded in my chest, a wild drummer in the quiet that ensued. That night I didn't sleep a wink. The knocking was a nightly ritual. Each time, the voice became slightly louder, slightly clearer, slightly more insistent. Return what's ours. We want them back. They are ours. I tried everything. I called the police, but with no evidence, no forced entry. They put it down to paranoia, the ramblings of an old man. I looked up missing person reports, dental records, and anything that could link the teeth to a victim to some kind of explanation. But I found nothing. The jar was always on my mantelpiece now, an ever-present reminder of the horror that had invaded my life. I thought about throwing it away, burning it, anything to rid myself of it. But something held me back. A kind of macabre curiosity, I guess. Or perhaps something deeper, more primal. The fear that just throwing the jar away wouldn't stop whatever was coming. One night, the knocking had a different tone. It was louder, more hostile, a pelting that rattled the whole house. The voice was no longer raspy but guttural. Give them back. They are ours. I sat huddled in my living room, paralyzed with fear. I knew it was coming for me. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be satisfied until it had what it wanted. Then I saw it, in the glass of the jar, a face soldered to the window. Not a human face, but a grotesque caricature, all razor angles and darkened hollows. And where there should have been teeth, there was only a yawning void. Then an awful realization began to hit me. The jar didn't just contain teeth. It was the home of looted items, parts of something that was, and now something wanted them back. Filled with a sudden desperate bravery, I snatched the jar and raced to the front door. I flung it open and pitched the jar into the dark. The glass shattered over the stone path, the teeth strewn all over like fallen stars. Silence, then a sigh. A lengthy, protracted sigh of relief, of accomplishment. A dark form separated from the shadows, forming into a vaguely human shape. It stooped, collecting the scattered teeth with long skeletal fingers. Not looking at me, not acknowledging my presence. It stuffed the teeth into its gaping maw. There was a sickening crunch as something gave way. Then it turned and walked away, fading back into the darkness from which it emerged. The knocking stopped. The voice was gone, but the fear remained. I knew, deep in my heart, that all I was doing was postponing the inevitable. That one day something else would come. Another piece, another demand, and I would be ready, or at least tried to be, because some debts are never really paid in this world. Some things always come due, especially at midnight. The stranger in a family photograph. Grandpa Silas was always a little bit of a strange bird, even for our eccentric family. He stockpiled newspapers, chatted with squirrels, and muttered about things he'd locked away. For the good of us all, we rolled our eyes as kids, and looking up now at the worn photo of my clan on the dusty mantelpiece, I ask if we should have listened harder. This picture was taken at my 10th birthday party. There's my gap-toothed grin, surrounded by a host of cousins, aunts, and uncles. Grandpa Silas stands off to the side, looking typical grump. And then there's him, the stranger. He's always hanging out in the margins of our old family photos. A blurry, indefinable figure, always slightly out of focus. Often he's in the background, shadowed by trees, or half concealed behind a throng of relatives. But he's always there, a silent, spectral observer. We had first seen him when I was around 12. My cousin Sarah noticed him in a slideshow of old family vacations. "Who's that creepy guy?" she'd said, her voice tinged with childish fear. Grandma shushed her and immediately advanced the slide. But later she told us it was probably some trick of the light, a shadow, or maybe an overexposed part of the film. We were kids, we accepted it, but the germ of anxiety had been sown. The stranger eventually evolved into a murder game. We'd sift through old pictures, hunting him down, tallying his sightings like some sick bird watcher. He was always consistent. He showed up in photographs from the time my birth in 1980 to when Grandpa Silas entered a nursing home in 2005. After that, nothing. We inquired about him one time, maybe 15 years ago, with Grandpa. His reaction was intense. His face went white, and his hands shook, and he murmured something about things better left undisturbed. He wouldn't say anything else, saying it was just our imaginations playing tricks. But his fear was palpable. He died 2 months ago, and that's when it started to get really creepy. I had inherited the family house, with its dusty attic and disturbing history. Doing some clean out of old boxes, debating what to keep and what to discard, I came across them, the family albums. The ones we had all but forgotten about. I took a seat, glass of wine in hand, and leafed through the pages. Nostalgic feelings washed over me, tinged with a prick of anxiety. I knew he would be there, the stranger. He was, but something was different. In the 80s photos, he was a shadowy figure, almost invisible. But as I went through the albums, decade by decade, he came into focus, more defined. In the late 90s photos, you could almost see a face, a thin, disquieting face, hollow-eyed. And in those early 2000s photos, he was all but in the group. No longer just lurking in the background, but up front, shoulder to shoulder with us. A silent, unwelcome guest. Well, then I found one, a photo of my wedding in 2004. I felt the stranger hovering right behind me, his hand on my shoulder. The hand had stopped being blurry, but instead was still. It was skeletal, impossibly long, its fingers bone-like. I closed the album with a slap, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed to understand. I had wanted to know what Grandpa Silas had tucked away in his shed, and what this thing was doing in our family photos. I spent the next several days researching local history, poring through old newspaper archives and genealogy databases online. I was searching for anything, some connection to something dark. Then I found it, an article from 1918. A few lines, almost dismissively, about a local farmer, Silas Blackwood, found dead in his barn. The cause of death was described as accidental, but the article noted strange symbols carved into the barn door and rumors of occultists. Blackwood, Silas Blackwood. The full name of Grandpa Silas was Silas Blackwood Montgomery. That's my grandma's maiden name, Montgomery. He had taken it when they got married. A shield against the past. With this insight, I returned to the house. The deference we had afforded to that simmering dread boiled over, becoming fully realized and taking the form of terror. I feel as if I am under surveillance. I began hunting the house methodically, room by room. I wanted something, anything that would account for the stranger, the symbols, the occult practices. It was there, in the attic, tucked away underneath a loose floorboard. A small, wooden box with intricate carvings matching those in the newspaper article. Inside, in a nest of faded velvet, lay a tarnished silver locket. I opened it. It opened to reveal a tiny portrait. A portrait of the stranger. But this was not a blurry, amorphous figure. It was a painting that was clear and full of detail. The man in the portrait had the same pinched face and the same soulless eyes. But he also had a name, inscribed in tiny letters under the image, Bartholomew Blackwood. I could hear clanging, tumbling, and snatches of song until the last one went up and the wind began. A cold one that passed through the attic and snuffed out the single bare bulb hanging off the rafters. I gasped, letting the locket drop to the dust-covered floor. And then I heard it, a whisper, hoarse and near, just behind me. "You shouldn't have opened that." I whirled around, my heart tightening in my chest. In the doorway, caught in the weak glow of the moon that seeped through the filthy pane, stood the stranger. He was no longer blurry, no longer indistinct. He was real, and he was smiling. He extended a long, skeleton-fingered hand towards me. At that moment, I understood. Grandpa Silas hadn't put it away. He'd locked him away, and now I had set him free. It was a scream, but I could not make it. Not a sound. I could only stare, frozen in fear, while the stranger moved closer and fixed his empty eyes on me. The last thing I saw, right before it all went black, was the glint of silver in his decaying hand. The locket, and inside it, a tiny knowing smile. The reflection in the water. The lake was always my safe place. In solitude, only the gentle lap of the water against the dock and the mournful cry of the loons. I'd come here to get away, to find some peace after the storm that had been my life. My wife, Sarah, died a year earlier, and the silence in our old Victorian house had become unbearable. I went back to our cabin, along the beautiful shores of Lake Serenity, seeking solace in the silence that would fill my heart. That's when I began to notice it. It was a glassy, calm evening, the lake reflecting the sky at an eerie exactness. I waited by the dock, inhaling the familiar woody smell of damp pine needles. I looked at myself in the mirror, and a haggard, drawn face looked back. But then, something shifted. A little flicker like a faulty bulb. My reflection smiled. This was not a smile of welcome and reassurance. It was a wide one, a predatory curve of the lips that went too far, exposed too much gum. My own face was expressionless, carved with sorrow, but the reflection kept grinning, its eyes shining with an unsettling pleasure. I blinked, chalking it up to tiredness. Grief was playing tricks on the mind, I reasoned. But when I looked again, the smile was still there. And then the reflection said something. I couldn't make out the words, but the shape of its lips shaped a very specific, chilling phrase. "You're next." Cold, sharp terror penetrated the numb shit I'd been living through forever. I stumbled backward, away from the dock's edge, certain my mind had finally come undone. I ran back to the cabin, slamming the door and bolting it behind me. That grinning face burned onto my retinas. Sleep provided no escape that night. I was haunted in my sleep by my tokes and whispers, by the feeling that I was being watched. In the morning, I told myself it was a nightmare, a cruel invention of my grief-muddled mind. But the dread sat in me, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. The following day, I steered clear of the lake. I found things to do around the cabin, chores of the minding, not the multitasking sort. But the tug of the water was too strong to resist. As evening approached, I was still drawn to the dock, morbid curiosity outweighing fear. The lake was still, the reflection sharp. A tired but normal face looked back at me. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful that it nearly brought me to my knees. There I went imagining things. I kept thinking. I was finally losing it. Then the reflection moved. It reached out its hand, not mine, emerging from the dark depths and gripping the lip of the dock. I gasped and recoiled in horror as it hoisted itself up, soaked and slick, its smile stretching wider and wider with every excruciating inch it covered. It was the same name as me, but it was not me. Its eyes too bright, too knowing. Its movements were too smooth, too unnatural. It was standing on the dock, a perfect, malevolent copy, and it tilted its head and stared at me coldly, as if studying me. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the cabin and barricaded myself behind furniture. I curled up in the corner, heart racing, straining to catch any sound of it. The quiet was almost more haunting than the sounds I imagined. That night I did not sleep a wink. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the leaves outside the window made my spine shiver. Dawn was not loomed soon enough. I emerged from my barricade when the sun's first light finally shone through the windows. The cabin was empty. The relief was short-lived. A cold draft slithered through the room, and I saw that the back door had been left ajar. I approached the door and reached for the knob with a shaking hand. As I opened it, I saw it, standing in the hallway just inside the dwelling. It was wearing my clothes, my old plaid shirt and faded jeans. It was frozen in place, its head tilted at that creepy angle. Its visage was an exact duplicate of my own, except the eyes. They glimmered with an unearthly light, fueled by an age-old, wicked awareness. It grinned, its lips peeled back in that grotesque smile. "Hello, me," it said, its voice a warped version of my own. "It's time." Terror paralyzed me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, caught in its gaze. It stepped closer, and I saw something glint in its hand. A knife. "It took you forever," a voice rattled, romantic, bruised with thrift and dust of coil. Waiting to finally be real. I knew, with a cold certainty that made my blood run cold, that the reflection wasn't in the water anymore. It was right here in my house, in my life, and it wanted what was mine. It wanted my life. The last thing I saw was its face. My face, twisted in a rictus of unmitigated, unadulterated evil as it lifted the knife and brought it down. The lake, I knew, would soon have a different reflection. And this one, I figured, wasn't about to disappear anytime soon. The hole in the forest. The woods had always been a refuge for me. A green cathedral, where rustling leaves whispered secrets and the smell of damp earth anchored me. But that was before the hole. Before the troubling quiet that now hovered in the air here. A quiet that felt heavier than a storm cloud. It started with the tremors, barely noticeable at first, as if the earth was tossing and turning in its dreams. Then the reports, word that spread like whispers on the wind, of a sinkhole that developed deep in the woods, a spot with the unfortunate distinction of being nicknamed Devil's Gulch for the treacherous topography and strange disappearances that had plagued it over the years. I, a clear-minded man, took it for myth and natural geology. Sinkholes happen, but then the campers began returning with pale, haunted eyes, their narratives punctuated with a chilling sameness. They chattered about a deep, rhythmic pulsation that radiated from the hole, a sound that pulled you closer against your better judgment. They described an unnatural silence, interrupted only by the wind howling through trees like a mournful wail. They served to be observed. As a writer, restless and curious about the dark and the unexplained, I decided to become a detective. I took a bag, a camera, and went into the woods. It was getting colder as I neared Devil's Gulch. The trees appeared to strain away from the path, their branches twisted, skeletal. Finally, I reached it. It was an enormous hole, a cavernous jack-o'-lantern in the dirt, hungry for the light. It was not a neat, circular depression. It was jagged and fragmented, as though the earth had been shredded by an explosion. It smelled awful, a sickly sweet, cloying odor that made my stomach turn. And yes, there it was, the pulsing, a low, thrumming vibration that I felt more than heard, deep in my bones. The urge to creep toward the edge was strong. My rational mind screamed at me to turn around, but some other part of me, some wicked curiosity, had me glued to the spot. I took several timid steps closer, my hand reaching for the camera before I knew it. I looked over the edge, my breath catching in my throat. Darkness, baffling, complete darkness. I couldn't see the bottom. It was as if I was gazing into the abyss, and the abyss was gazing back. The pulsing grew stronger, and I could swear, for the briefest of moments, that I saw something shift in the blackness below. A flicker, a suggestion of movement, like a living thing slowly waking. I backed away, my heart banging against my ribs. I spent the next several hours recording the sight, taking pictures, writing notes, and trying to process what I was witnessing. But the rational side of my brain continued to short-circuit. The whole defied explanation. It was something else. That night, I slept safely down the road, but sleep was a tentative friend. I dreamt I fell into the hole. I fell all the way into its endless darkness. I dreamt I got swallowed in the pulsing rhythm. I awoke in a cold sweat, the visionary image of the abyss burning in my memory. The following day, I woke up confused. The sun was higher than I expected, which meant I'd slept hours later than usual. My head pounded, and my arms and legs felt heavy and unresponsive. And so as I pieced the morning's events together, a horrifying understanding washed over me. I found my sleeping bag farther from the campfire than I recalled setting it up. Much further. Panic constricted my throat. I shot upright, looking around the clearing. And then I saw it. My footprints. Trail on right, leading away from the campsite leading towards the hole. It was unmistakable. The familiar tread of my hiking boots pressed into the pliant ground. I trailed behind them, my stomach roiling with dread. The closer I got to the hole, the more tenuous the prints, as if I had been dragging my feet in a trance, barely aware of the ground beneath me. And then, at the very lip of the hole, the tracks just vanished. I stood frozen in place, fear flooding me as the sweetish smell of rot filled my nose. Now the pulsing was stronger, almost deafening, and the ground shook beneath my feet. I opened my eyes slowly, painfully, peered over the edge. This time it was different. This time I heard it, breathing, a low, guttural rasping, like the breath of some ancient leviathan awakening from a lengthy hibernation. I heard that sound echoing from the hole's depths, the sound like claws digging into my sanity. And then, a voice, weak, muffled, but a voice. It whispered my name. I flinched, staggered backward, my mind unspooling. The voice came louder, closer, more insistent. It summoned me over and over, offering knowledge, power, understanding. It was going to complete me, to fill the hole in my soul. I ran. I did not dare look back as I ran for my life, past the E&D of the world as we know it. I sprinted until I broke free of the trees, panting, fire in my lungs and my heart jumping from my chest. I never went back to the forest then. I still feel the pulsing, a low hum in the darkest corners of my brain. I still hear the whispers, a perpetual murmur just beneath the edge of my awareness. I know it's still there, the hole, waiting, and I know with sickening certainty that one day it will summon me back. Because the hole is more than a hole in the forest. It's a hole in my soul, and something down there knows my name. And it's breathing. The elevator game. Curiosity killed the cat, they say. Well, curiosity and a Wikipedia binge at 3 a.m. brought me to this, the elevator game. A ritual, or so the internet said, that could open a portal to another dimension, requiring nothing more than a regular elevator and the right combination of floor presses. Call it urban legend, paranormal hoax, internet creepypasta. But there was something about the audacity of it, the prosaic nature of using an elevator as a portal, that hooked me. I was living in an apartment building with an old-fashioned elevator. Slow, rickety, the kind of with the accordion gate and dark bulb. Perfect. I waited until after midnight, when the building was still and all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the walls opening and closing. My heart crashed against my ribs when I stepped inside an elevator. The instructions were imprinted in my mind. 4-2-6-2-10. If all went as the legend said, on the 10th floor a woman would step inside. I was not to look at her. I was to press 5. If the elevator then ascended to the first floor, then the ritual was functioning. I inhaled shakily and punched 4. The ascent was excruciatingly slow. Then 2. The ancient machinery wheezed as if protesting this unholy task. Then 6. The silence was thick, stifling. 2 again. My palms, sweating, slicked. Finally, 10. The doors slid open, and there she was, waiting right on the other side of the door. Her back was to me, had long, dark hair that tumbled over her shoulders. The instructions rang out in my mind. Do not look at her. I stumbled with my fingers to the button, shaken, pressed 5. The doors began to close. I just kept my eyes on the floor, resisting the urge to turn, to see. It was a pain in my body to wait. The elevator shuddered, then started down. For 3, 2, 1. It worked. I had done it. I had pulled it off. Now, the next step. Press 1. This was the tipping point. I pressed the button, the number glowing a sickly green in the poorly lit space. The elevator resumed its ascent. To where? To what? The world beyond the gate sparkled and did not feel like the familiar hallway of my apartment building. It was all muted, desaturated, like a photograph faded by the sun. It was sickeningly sweet and rancid in the air. The air was thickening, like hours in a hot car. This was it. Another dimension. The doors opened on the 10th floor, and I knew instinctively that I had to get out. Now, I opened the door to the hallway, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar environment. It was as if my building, and at the same time completely wrong. The wallpaper was the same pattern, but the colors were reversed, a sickly palette of browns and greens. A deep, low pulsating hum thrummed in the air like a residual echo that rattled through my bones. Logan was supposed to take me back to the elevator, push 1 again, and I was supposed to be sent back to my reality. But something stopped me. A feeling, a cold dread that seized my spirit. I can't explain it, but I said to myself, no going back in there. I passed toward the hall, my steps eerily resonating into the thick silence. I needed to get out another way, any other way. Then I heard it, a gentle shuffling behind me, getting closer. I didn't look, couldn't. I just started running. The corridor just went on forever, each door a duplicate of the next. The shuffling had intensified, the clicking of wet sounds punctuating it. At the end of the hallway, I finally spotted it, a stairwell. My heart lifted with hope when I flung the door open and dove inside. Down, down, down I ran, the sound of my own labored breathing ringing in my ears. Behind me, the shuffling went on, persistent, unhurried. It wasn't running. It didn't need to. I pushed the door at the bottom of the stairwell open, and I was in the lobby. My lobby. But it was different. The same eerie desaturation, the same suffocating atmosphere. I sprinted for the front door, hand on the handle when I saw it. In the corner, half in shadow, stood the woman from the elevator. Long, dark hair covered her face, but I could see her hands. Long, spindly fingers, terminated in black, chitinous claws. And then she tilted her head, just slightly, and I saw her face, or what was left of it. The skin was very thin and almost translucent, pulled tightly over the bone. Her eyes were empty sockets, brimming with a viscous black liquid. And her mouth, a slit packed with a rank of needle-sharp teeth. That was when a silent scream ripped through my throat. I tore open the door and half fell out into the night. The cold air was like a slap to my face, waking me up, or so I hoped. I haven't returned to my apartment since. I'm staying at a motel on the edge of town. It's been 3 days, and I haven't slept. Her face haunts my dreams. I keep hearing the shuffling. I believed I had sent that thing to the other dimension. But I was wrong, dead wrong. I can feel it, lurking, waiting, followed me back. And I dread that it will never leave me alone. The elevator game, they forgot to tell you the price you pay when you win. The price is your sanity. The price is your soul. And the worst part is, I suspect it wants a rematch. The hiker's journal. The odor of mold and rotten leaves saturates its air. October in the Appalachians was a beautiful beast, all fire and crisp air, but it was also a bit unkind. We'd hiked for 3 days, A bunch of us old college pals trying to relive the carefree spirit of our youth. What I felt instead were the tears welling in my knees and a creeping discomfort that appeared to be rising up from the earth itself beneath our boots. I found it, half buried in fallen leaves, nestled underneath the exposed roots of a gnarled oak. A plain, leather-bound journal, with pages that had browned and softened over time. A thrill I hadn't felt since I used to pore over dusty tomes in the university library gnawed at me. I wiped the earth off its cover and opened it. The handwriting was scrawly, on occasion nearly indecipherable. The ink appeared antiquated, washed out to a sepia tone. The first entries were dull. The hiker's progress, the weather, and notes about wildlife. Then, things took a turn. Day 4, lost. Maps useless. The forest keeps shifting. I swear I've seen that same rock formation 3 times. My spine prickled with a shiver. I looked at my friends, giggling and playfully fighting each other as we maneuvered our way over an especially tricky part of the trail. They were oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere that was upon me. Day 5, something is watching. I sense it behind my neck, always just beyond the trees. I hit, but it's too quick. I tried to glimpse. My heart began to pound. This was the paranoia of some lost hiker, I told myself. The wilderness could do strange things to a mind. But the next listing sent a chill through my blood. Day 7. It's imitating their voices. Don't answer. I closed the journal with a snap, my hand shaking. Mimicking voices? What the hell did that mean? Find something interesting, Mark? It was David, his cherubic face lined with concern. Just an old journal, I said, thrusting it into my pack. Nothing important. The rest of the day didn't properly appear in focus. I kept looking at my friends, examining their faces, listening to their conversations. Were they different? I couldn't articulate it, but a certain wrongness in the air had fallen over everything. That evening we sat around a crackling campfire, the darkness closing around us like a physical presence. We shared stories, laughed, and drank lukewarm beer. But even the comfortable new camaraderie couldn't lift the sense of growing dread that was settling in and taking root in me. Then I heard it, just a whisper, heard on the wind. Mark, help me. It was Sarah's voice. I froze, my eyes flying to Sarah, who was sitting next to me, roasting a marshmallow. She was laughing at something John said. Sarah, I said, my voice too low for the crackling fire to reach. She looked at me, confused. What's wrong, Mark? The whisper returned, this time louder. Mark, please, I'm hurt. I need your help. This time it was unmistakably Sarah's voice, laced with pain and desperation. But Sarah was standing next to me. My blood ran cold. I took her arm, my grip clenched. Sarah, did you say something? Her brows knitted, and she shook her head. No, I haven't. Then John's voice, shaky with fear, pierced the night. Mark, I'm trapped. I can't get out. John was on the other side of the fire from me just fine. He held a half-eaten hot dog and looked as confused as Sarah. John, what the hell are you saying? It would feel different, David said, his voice strained. I hadn't said anything, John stammered. The voices started to meld together, a slurred choir of frantic begging, all in the voices of my friends. Mark, please help me. I'm lost. I'm hurt. Don't leave me. Panic seized me. I knew with a chilling certainty that the warning in the journal was real. Whatever it was out there, in the blackness beyond the firelight, was imitating my friends' voices. I put my hands over my ears, shutting out the cacophony of pleas. Mark, what's wrong? Are you okay? The real David's voice was laced with concern. I tore my hands off my ears, my gaze skipping from face to face. I could trust nothing that I was hearing. I couldn't trust anyone. We need to get out of here, I yelled in a hoarse voice. Now, we have to leave this place. My friends looked at me, unable to comprehend. Mark, you're freaking us out, Sarah said, her voice quivering. Don't listen to them, I yelled, snatching my pack and getting to my feet. It's not them. It's mimicking them. I spun and fled into the dark, the voices of my friends. or the things that looked like my friends, ringing in my ears. "Mark, come back. Where are you going? Don't leave us." I stumbled away from trees, branches pulling at my skin, darkness consuming me. I didn't know where I was headed, but knew I needed to leave. I had to get out of the forest and away from the entity that was hidden inside it, ready to draw me to my doom with the whispers of my loved ones. I've been running ever since. I don't know if my friends are alive, or if they're simply echoes, marionettes pulled by whatever malevolent power resides in those woods. What I do know is that I cannot trust anyone, and I can't trust my ears. The journal I don't have anymore, lost in the chaos of my flight, but the warning is burned into my brain. It's mimicking their voices. Don't answer, and I never will. The babysitter's rulebook. The minivan's taillights dissolved in the rainy twilight as it drove off, leaving me on the porch with a damp palm clutching the house key. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson appeared, anxious, more than the standard parental anxiety before abandoning their darlings to the care of a teenager. Perhaps it was the storm approaching, the wind already tearing at the skeletal branches of the ancient oak in the front yard. "Just call if you need anything, Sarah," Mrs. Henderson had chirped, her smile tight and brittle. "The number's on the fridge." And I plastered my most reassuring smile on and waved and watched them go down the long, winding driveway. Looking back at the house, I felt a shiver race up my spine that had nothing to do with the damp cold. The Henderson house was, to be frank, creepy. It was an old Victorian and had that creepy quiet that comes with places where something lingers. I opened the door, the heavy oak creaking in protest, and walked inside. Billy, 8, and Lily, 6, were already piled together in the living room, eyes trained on the flickering screen of the television. The miniature version of his father, Billy nodded curtly. Lily, inheritor of her mother's blonde curls and unervingly wide eyes, didn't move. Cleared my throat. "Okay, kids, what do you want for dinner?" They shrugged together, eyes locked on the cartoon violence playing out on the screen. I sighed, the heaviness of the evening washing over me already. Babysitting was typically a mindless, easy gig. This felt different. The kitchen, a surprising one, was modern and sleek, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. In one corner, a stainless steel fridge hummed, and on the door, held in place by a magnet shaped like a grinning skull, there was a single sheet of paper, the babysitter's rulebook. I frowned and pulled it down. The handwriting was neat, looping, almost elegant, but the instructions themselves were chilling. Don't go upstairs. Don't answer the landline. Feed the cat. I scanned the list, my stomach speaking back to me. Don't go upstairs. Why? The landline? I hardly remembered there was such a thing as a landline. And feed the cat? Mrs. Henderson didn't say anything about a cat, I mumbled to myself. I returned to the living room. "Hey guys," I said, attempting to sound casual. "You have a cat?" Billy didn't even look up. "Nope." Lily instead canted her head, her gaze curious and unsettlingly focused. "Patches is sleeping," she whispered. "He gets hungry." I swallowed, forcing a smile. "Well, your mom maybe forgot to tell you that. Where's the cat food?" Billy turned his attention away from the TV at last. "Upstairs." My heart started to race, and blood drained from my face. "No, no way," I said, a bit too emphatically. "Your mom would have told me. We'll just have pizza." I ordered a pizza online, attempting to ignore the heat on the back of my neck. The rain grew heavier, pounding on the windows like a persistent hand. The wind howled and the old house creaked around us, producing a symphony of unnerving sounds. A welcome distraction, the pizza arrived. We dined in painful silence. The only sounds the crackle of the fire I'd reluctantly started in the living room and the steady drumming of the rain. After dinner, I was able to shepherd the kids upstairs for a bath, deliberately ignoring the second floor. As I was tucking them into bed, Lily reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "It makes him angry when you forget to feed him," she whispered, so softly it was almost lost to the storm. "Who, honey?" I asked, forcing myself to keep my voice level. "Patches," she said, widening her eyes in a peculiar fear. He gets angry. I patted her hand gently. Don't worry, Lily. There's no cat. I pulled the blanket tighter around her, backed away from the room, through treacle. Downstairs, the house felt colder, the silence denser. The rain kept pummeling. The wind felt like it was tearing at the window panes. Suddenly, another ring cut the silence like a knife and startled me. The landline. My heart thudded in my rib cage. Don't answer the landline. The rule was clear. I stood over the old, beige phone on the hall table, its presence repulsively akimbo. It sounded again, a strident, insistent peal, fighting the urge to run screaming from the house. I took a deep breath and tried to be rational. Perhaps it was the Hendersons checking in. Maybe it was the wrong number. The phone kept ringing, its almost piercing jangling threatening to tip me toward panic. At last, I'd had too much. I snatched up the receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling. On the other end, a raspy, breathy voice said, "He's hungry." The line went dead. I banged the phone back in its cradle, my hand shaking uncontrollably. He's hungry. Who was he? Patches? But there was no cat. At that moment, a scratching noise came from above us. A slow, deliberate scratch, scratch, scratch from the second floor. I froze, every nerve ending shrieking in horror. The scratching stopped. A low growl, a guttural sound that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the house. I ran. I picked up my purse, staggered out the front door, and ran into the storm. I didn't stop running until I hit the main road, the rain plastering my hair to my face and the wind whipsawing at my clothes. I never contacted the Hendersons. I never went back. Then I started hearing whispers around town. The whispers about the old Henderson house, the whispers about strange happenings, the whispers about a family that had disappeared without a trace decades ago. There were whispers about a black cat named Patches who was never fed. And sometimes late at night, when the wind howls and the rain pelts my window, I hear a faint scratch, 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 and I remember the babysitter's rulebook. And I know with a bone-chilling certainty that some rules are made to be broken. But others are there to save your life. The vanishing village. The damn GPS. After this trip, I vowed to invest in a proper atlas. Recalculating, the cold female voice chirped for the 10th or so time, as though that might somehow summon a paved road from the overgrown track I was currently traversing. I should have been in Harmony Creek hours ago, dropping off those antique clocks for Mrs. Abernathy. Now I was somewhere deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and swallowed by a green so thick and layered it felt claustrophobic. Eventually the trees broke and a group of buildings came into view. A village. A wave of relief overcame me, quickly followed by a tingle of dread. The village was wrong. It seemed timeless, as if it had come straight from a sepia-toned history book. The stone buildings hunched together, their windows dark and empty. No cars, no power lines, no evidence of modern life at all. As I approached, the silence grew deafening. There was no bird song, no dog bark, not even wind through the leaves. Just the low rumble of my engine, an intrusive noise in this curiously quiet spot. I parked on the fringe of the village square, a dusty expanse dominated by a crumbled stone well. As I shut off the engine, a couple of people emerged from the shadows. Their faces were haggard, their eyes sunken and almost maniacal. They stared, not with curiosity, but with a ravenous hunger that sent the hair on the back of my neck to attention. "Can I help you?" I asked, forcing a smile. Even to me, it felt brittle and fake. A frail woman hunched over, digging a shawl around some face. Her eyes, pitch black, pierced mine. "You are new here?" she croaked, voice raspy, as if not used in years. "Just passing through," I said, waving vaguely. "Lost my way, heading to Harmony Creek. Do you know how to get there?" The old woman didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head, the movement almost slow and deliberate, sending a shiver down my spine. The other villagers closed ranks, surrounding me and my truck in a semicircle. I did my best not to be bothered by how they looked at me. Their eyes glistened in the lowering rays of sun. "Harmony Creek?" she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "We have never heard of such place." Doubt gnawed at me. Surely someone up here knew Harmony Creek. It was a small town, but not that small. I reached for my phone, hoping to access a map. The screen stayed stolidly blank. "Not service," a younger man said, stepping forward. He was tall and thin, his face devoid of color, drawn. "The mountains prevent the signal." I gritted my teeth. Of course, they did. I looked at my phone again, this time seeing something different. A bright white message blinking at the top of the screen. "No service. Leave while you can." My blood ran cold. That message was not a typical error message. That was a warning. I stuffed the phone into my pocket as casually as I could. "Well, thanks anyway," I said and forced another grin. "I'll discover it myself." I started to turn back into my truck and the villagers sealed the circle. I could smell them now. They were so close. The earthy, musty stink that hung in the air like rot. "Where are you going?" the old woman asked, the lilt of her voice steeped in an undiagnosed haze. Was it amusement? Anticipation? "Just need to check something in the back," I stammered, waving at the cargo bed. The back of the truck. I cautiously made my way back there, my eyes scanning for an escape route. They were bad people. They weren't right. There was something horribly, inexorably wrong with them. The way they looked at me, the way they moved, the thick silence that suffocated the village, it all reeked of danger. I feigned fidgeting with the tarp over the clocks, buying some time to think. My heart pounded in my chest, a wild rhythm in the thick silence. I had to be somewhere else, somewhere far away and fast. Then the old woman spoke again, a bit louder this time, with an urgency in her voice. "He has seen the clocks," she shrieked, stabbing a gnarled finger at me. "He knows the time. He must stay." The crowd gasped in unison, their faces twisted with equal parts fear and hunger. They pushed ahead, arms outstretched toward me. Panic seized me. I tore the tarp off the clocks, and they toppled to the ground. The deafening bang broke the silence and stunned villagers briefly. It was enough. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door closed, and crammed the key into the ignition. The engine wheezed, coughed, and eventually roared to life. I threw the truck into reverse, its tires showering gravel as I backed from the encroaching crowd. They screamed then, a high, inhuman wail echoing across the valley. I didn't look back, and so I opened up the throttle on the gas and blasted back up the runway with those images of those gaunt faces and hungry eyes burned upon my retina. Only by the time I hit the main road, reluctantly kilometers from that damned village, did I stop. I pulled over, gasping for air, hyperventilating, my hands shaking by my side. I didn't even dare to look in the rearview mirror. Sometime later, after I had delivered the clocks to a puzzled Mrs. Abernathy and swallowed a bottle of cheap whiskey, I went looking for the village on Google Maps. It wasn't there. I pored over historical maps and topographical surveys. Nothing. It was like the village had never existed, a figment of my sleep-deprived mind. But I knew it was real. I could still detect the musty odor, still hear the inhuman wail of the villagers. And every time I look at my phone, I see that chilling white message, a reminder in the silence of the disappearing village and the warning I did not heed enough. No service. Leave while you can. And at night, sometimes, I swear I can hear it ticking, the slow, relentless ticking of clocks I left. The neighbor's dog. The howling began a week ago, a mournful, gut-twisting sound that raked against my sanity like fingernails on a chalkboard. It always started just after midnight and didn't stop until dawn, a marching band of hopelessness. I'm a light sleeper, I always have been, and earplugs provided no relief. And it was coming from the Ramirez's place next door. They were new to the neighborhood, having moved in about a month ago, mostly kept to themselves, which I always appreciate. But this was too much. I'd seen them taking a big dog crate out of their car when they first moved in, so I figured it was a hound of some sort, perhaps a beagle mix. Something grand of voice and taste for night lament. I did everything I could to ignore it. White noise machines, herbal tea, even counting sheep. Nothing worked. By day, I was a zombie, slogging through work. By night, I was imprisoned in my own house, compelled to hear the unsoundful voices. After 3 nights of such a thing, I was ready to snap. I thought about calling animal control, but I didn't take the step. The Ramirezes appeared to be nice people, and I didn't want to go to war with my new neighbors. So I went for a more diplomatic approach. I waited until late afternoon, when Mrs. Ramirez was caring for her sad-looking rose bushes. "Excuse me," I said, heading for the fence. "I hate to be a nuisance, but the howling at night, it's been keeping me up. Is everything okay with your dog?" She got to her feet, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over her face. Her eyes, when she finally turned toward me, were oddly empty. "Oh, you hear him, do you?" she remarked, her voice raspy, as if she hadn't used it in a long time. "Hear him? I'm practically conducting him, and this has been going on for days." A queer smile flitted across her lips. "He's just adjusting. He gets lonely at night." "Well, could I put a shock collar or how to leave the TV on? Something. I'm going insane over here." She remained unresponsive and kept staring at me with that disturbing, empty gaze. She went back to her roses, snipping dead heads with a pair of rusty shears. "He'll adjust," she said again, her voice a whisper. That was it. That was all I got. The crying went on that night, louder, more wretched than ever. Lying in bed, I stewed with outrage and a rising sense of dread. The vacant eyes of Mrs. Ramirez kept playing in my mind. There was something off, something somehow deeply unnerving about her. Motivated by a desperate desire to know and perhaps a little morbid curiosity, I took a look. My property abutted theirs, divided by a tall wooden fence. I normally wouldn't dream of snooping, but this was not normal. This was about my sanity. In the pre-dawn hours, about 3 a.m., armed with a small stepladder and a healthy sense of trepidation, I tiptoed out into my backyard. The moon was shrouded in thick clouds, so the yard was a chiaroscuro of deep shadows. The howling echoed from beyond the fence, nearer, more visceral now. I leaned the ladder against the fence and ascended, my heart pounding in my chest. The fence hit just under my chin. I steeled myself and looked over. A single, sputtering porch light dimly illuminated the Ramirez's backyard. In the middle of the yard, tethered to a corroded iron stake, was a thing. It wasn't a dog. Not any dog I had ever known or even dreamed of. It was big, easily the size of a small pony. Its body was a hideous patchwork of animal parts. Shaggy, matted fur on its hindquarters, tough, almost reptilian skin on its chest, a cluster of spindly, insect-like legs protruding from its back. But I think the most terrible part, the part that turned my blood to ice, was its head. It was not a dog head or an animal head. It was human, a skeletal face, framed by greasy, matted hair. The eyes, empty and bloodshot, gazed without seeing into the night sky. One large mouth, contorted into a perpetual, noiseless scream and the source of the ghastly howling. I almost fell off the ladder. My stomach turned, and I slapped a hand to my mouth to keep down a scream. This couldn't be real. There had to be a nightmare, the result of a lack of sleep and fraying nerves. But it was real. Hideously, monstrously real. The beast moved, and one of its multi-jointed limbs brushed against the ground. That was when I saw the collar on its neck. Not a dog collar, but a heavy metal band, marked with strange symbols I didn't know. My legs shook as I scrambled down the ladder. I fell back into the house, banging the door shut behind me. I locked all the bolts, drew all the curtains, and huddled on the couch, trembling in the darkness. There was no question of sleeping. I lay awake until dawn, hearing the ongoing howling, each mournful note another pistol with a blade, another twist in my belly. Eventually, the sun came up and streaked the sky with pale and apologetic colors. I realized I couldn't remain there, frozen in fear. I had to do something. But what? Who would believe me? I sound insane. I resolved I needed to see it again. In daylight, perhaps it would not be as horrifying. Perhaps I had dreamt up the face. My hands shook as I opened my back door and stepped into the yard. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and Something else, something caustic and rotting. The beating of my heart could be heard in my ears as I neared the fence. I paused, then pushed myself back up the ladder. The beast was still there, chained to the post. Its human face looked even more terrifying in the light of day, the skin drawn sickly tight against its jaw, its eyes glazed and dead. But there was something else that was different. Mrs. Ramirez stood next to it, her hand on the creature's back. She glanced over and made direct eye contact with me. This time, her gaze was unobstructed, unwavering, and hardened by a cool, exultant venom. She smiled a slow, predatory smile that made me shiver. "He's gotten used to it," she said, her voice by now clear and strong. "He likes you very much." And then the creature cocked its human head, and one wet tear traveled down its grotesque cheek. The howling started again, louder, more frantic, a sickening certainty settling in. It was now a declaration directed at me. The ghost train. The rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was the only sound that had dared disturb the silence of my old Victorian home. I had gotten used to it, and even found some comfort in its steady cadence, in its reminder of the relentless passage of time. But last night, the clock's familiar tick-tock was overshadowed by something much more sinister. It began as a low, mournful wail, a sound that vibrated deep in my chest, resonating with a primal fear I had long thought buried. I sat straight up in bed, my heart pounding against my ribs. What was that? An animal in distress? A storm brewing? Then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. It was a train whistle, loud and drawn out, the kind that would reverberate through this valley decades past when the iron horse dominated these parts. Except, the train hadn't run in 5 decades. The tracks were rusting, overrun by weeds, a remnant of a bygone era. I made it to the window and half pulled aside the heavy velvet curtains. And there it was. A train stood bathed in an ethereal, almost spectral light. Not some nice everyday train, but one that looked right out of nightmare. Its iron and steel engine, a bloated monster of a thing, huffed and wheezed, belching out clouds of acrid, greasy black smoke that fizzed and twisted like tortured souls. The carriages behind it were a wreck, paint blistered and flaking, windows dark and vacant as empty eye sockets. But the most terrible thing was the blood. It dripped, not in simple droplets, but in thick, viscous streams from the undercarriage, pooling on the ground, staining the already blackened earth a deeper, more terror-inducing hue. I could even taste the metallic tang of it, up here in my bedroom. I stood frozen, terror gripping my limbs like a vice, as a figure climbed out of the engine. He was tall and thin, wearing a ragged, blood-soaked conductor's uniform. His face was in shadow, but I felt his gaze, cold and penetrating, light on mine. Gradually, ominously, he lifted a hand and then waved me to him. He waved. My mind screamed, terrified, frozen in place. I could do nothing but stand and stare, and the image of the ghost train was engraved in my mind. The conductor's gesture was an invitation, a beckoning to a place I knew in my gut I never should have gone. I don't know how long I stood there, transfixed by the macabre spectacle. It seemed like an eternity, but also a fleeting, horrific dream. Then, just as abruptly as it arrived, the train started moving. At first so slow, then so with the jerking sudden rust. It lurched down the rails, the wheels screaming against the crusted metal, a wheezy noise that twisted my nerves. The blood spilled on, a grotesque marker of its journey. It disappeared into the inky blackness of the valley before the train whistle hung in the air like a mournful, echoing cry, scraping into my soul. Then silence. The only thing I heard was my own heart racing. I staggered back from the window and fell onto my bed, my body shaking violently. Was it a dream? A fantasy induced by age and solitude? I wanted so badly to believe it was, but all around me the foul stench of iron and rot, the cold echo of the whistle, the mangled, blood-soaked train told me otherwise. Sleep was impossible. The rest of the night, I lay curled up in the bed, every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sending shivers down my spine. As day finally broke, streaking the sky pale pink and gray. I stepped outside. There was a strange, metallic smell in the air. I followed the old line back until I got to where I had seen the train. The rails were still in place, rusted and overgrown, but something was different. The weeds were pressed down, trampled as if something heavy had just rolled across. And there, spattering the earth a ghastly crimson, were patches of dried blood. I stepped back slowly, my mind spinning. It hadn't been a dream. The ghost train was real. And the conductor, what did he want? Why had he waved at me? Throughout the day, the questions haunted me. I examined it, hoping to make sense of it, hoping to discover the reason, but I knew there was none. This was something otherworldly, wooden and archaic that had stirred in its sleep. But every night, I draw back to the window, to stare into the darkness, to wait for the mournful wail of the train whistle. I know it will return. I can sense it, the slow-acting poison that scrapes at my insides. And I worry that next time the conductor won't only wave. He'll be waiting, and I don't know if I'll have the strength to decline his invitation. The midnight train has not run in 50 years. But last night it chose me, and the tracks are calling. The Library of Lost Souls. I am the religion of the Dewey Decimal System. I know it inside and out. I can find a treatise on Etruscan pottery in my sleep. For 15 years, the whispering corridors of the grand, majestic public library have been my sanctuary, my refuge from the raucousness of the outside world. I'm a shelver, a lowly overseer of knowledge, and I take deep pride in my jobs. But there is one part one dread to hear. Section 13. During the day, it doesn't even exist. Ask anyone, even Mrs. Hawthorne, the head librarian, and they'll look at you as if you've sprouted a second head. Section 13? Preposterous, Mr. Davies. We just have 12 sections, and they're all meticulously organized and clearly labeled. That's because Section 13 is only open at midnight. I first saw it several months into the night shift. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed its morning 12 tolls, and a span of shelves shimmered into being against the far wall of the history section. Today it was the history section because maybe the past was trying to dig its fingers into our present. Books in Section 13 are unlike any other in the library. Their spines are ripped and tattered, binding cracking, the leather a pallid, jaundiced yellow. Unlike the printed titles, these appear etched, carved onto the surface, giving off a faint, malevolent glow. And the titles, they're not titles at all. They're screams. The betrayal of Amelia, the agony of Silas, the endless torment of Eliza. Even reading them sends a chill down my spine that has nothing to do with the library's ice-cold temperature. I froze the first time I saw it. I wanted to run, but morbid curiosity kept me here. I reached out, shaking, to touch the despair of Thomas, but a hand, unexpected, strong for its age, locked down on my wrist. It was Mrs. Hawthorne. Her usually prim and proper bun had come undone, wisps of gray hair framing a face marked with fear. Her eyes, typically sharp and bright, were wide and empty. "Quiet," she hissed, her voice no more than a whisper. "They'll hear you." "Hear me? Who?" I croaked, my voice shaking. She just stared, her grip tightening. "The souls, the lost souls. They're stuck in those books. Don't disturb them." Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the section disappeared. The clock, still echoing its last chime, seemed to mock my confusion. Mrs. Hawthorne found my wrist within her grasp, blinked a few times, and adjusted her bun for stability. "Mr. Davies," she said, her tone back to its normal, crisp sound. "Is everything all right? You seem a bit pale." I wanted to scream, to ask what happened, but I felt deep down that she would not remember a bit. I mumbled something about needing more coffee and left. For those 3 words, Section 13 has become an obsession of mine since. I scold it every evening, reciting a list of the titles I have memorized. I even attempted taking photographs, but the camera malfunctions. Images ended up as blurry, distorted messes. I've tried to look up the names on the spines. Amelia, Silas, Eliza, Thomas. None appear in any of the library's databases, or in any historical records. They are ghosts, doomed to linger in their tragic pages. I can feel the weight of their misery when I'm near Section 13. There is a weight on top of my lungs, an unbearable sadness that soaks my skin and fills my pockets. At times, I could swear I heard whispers, hazy pleas carried on the drafts that slither through the still halls. Even though she does not remember doing so, Mrs. Hawthorne still tells me that I should be careful. And every night, as the clock nears midnight, she comes alive, her eyes glassy as she croons her chilling refrain. Quiet, they will hear you. I've begun to suspect that she knows more than she's letting on. Or maybe she's a warden, like me, assigned to defend the world from the evils they concealed within Section 13. Or maybe she's a captive, bound to the library by some ancient oath, forced to relive the horrors every night. Then came last night when something shifted. As I faced Section 13 and focused on the new titles, the loneliness of Barnaby, the suffocation of Clara, I heard a new sound. It was not a whisper exactly. It was a scratching, a slight, tugging scrape behind the shelves. My heart pounded in my chest. Was something trying to escape, or was something trying to get in? I reached hesitantly for the shelves, and the scratching grew louder. I stopped at, my fingers hovering over the despair of Thomas. This time, the lure was stronger, the draw nearly irresistible. I wanted to know Thomas's despair and the degrees of his suffering. As my fingers grazed the spine, the room fell dark. The emergency lights flashed and then went dark. The air grew heavy, reeking of mildew and decay, and the scratching became a chorus of wails, a cacophony of anguish rising that felt like it would crack my brain in half. Then a voice, ringing out like a bell, pierced through the maelstrom. Help me! It was Thomas, paralyzed by fear. I could only stammer out, How can I help you? Read, the voice whispered. Read my story, and then finish it. That was the moment Mrs. Hawthorne screamed. A long, drawn-out scream rang through the darkness, stopping the voices short. The lights flickered back on. Section 13 was gone. Mrs. Hawthorne was slumped against the wall, her face pale and gaunt. I ran to her side and checked for a pulse. She was alive but unresponsive. As I held her head in my lap, I caught sight of something gripped tightly in her hand. A book, a leather-bound book without a title. I pried it open, my fingers shaking. The first page had one word, inscribed in faded ink. Thomas. I know what I have to do. I have to read Thomas's story. I have to finish it, but I'm terrified. What horrors will I unleash? What darkness will I usher into this world? But the plea, the desperate cry for help from a lost soul within the Library of Lost Souls is undeniable, because if I don't, I'm afraid. I'm afraid they're all going to hear me. The birthday party. The balloons floated in the wind, secured to the porch railing like restless, animated, colorful souls. 6. My son, Leo, was turning 6. 6 years since that mad dash to the hospital, 6 years since I held his tiny, perfect hand. 6 years that felt like they had vanished in an instant. But lately, a cloud had settled over the sunny landscape of his childhood. It began quietly, a name spoken in the shadows, a furtive look over his shoulder. Mr. Grimsby, he would say, a strange, faraway look on his bright blue eyes. He was Leo's imaginary friend. I attributed it to childhood whimsy, the creative imagination of a boy learning to make sense of the world. I even found it charming, that is, until Mr. Grimsby started to seem strange. The tales Leo wrote about grew darker, tinged with an unsettling unease. Mr. Grimsby didn't want to play regular games. He wanted to play games with shadows and whispers, games that would leave Leo huddled against me in the dark, his little body shaking. "He's coming to my party, Mommy," Leo had said a week ago, his voice flat, lacking the usual birthday enthusiasm. "Honey, imaginary friends don't come to parties." I'd laughed, hoping to sound soothing. He just looked at me, his eyes a little old and all-knowing. Mr. Grimsby is different. Now, on his birthday, as the bouncy castle was inflated and the smell of hot dogs grilling filled the air, I felt a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. And then the other parents arrived, the laughter and chatter converging into a soothing blanket of normalcy. But underneath it all, the dread festered, a cold knot in my stomach. I kept stealing glances at the edge of the woods that lined our backyard, a black, silent sentinel overlooking the festivities. Leo was quieter, and for once, he observed without the exuberance. He didn't run and play with the other children but stayed next to me, his hand hanging onto my leg. He flinched every time the wind rustled the leaves. "Is Mr. Grimsby here yet?" he murmured, not loud enough for the festive din to hear. "He's not real, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling to meet the gaze of his eyes. "There's no Mr. Grimsby. Please." He just shook his head, the small, sad shrug of the shoulders that gave me a shiver. The afternoon stretched on, sugar-fueled mayhem and fake smiles. I was skittish, every sound the house made, every unexpected noise jolting me with fear. Then came the cake. I lit the 6 candles, the flickering flames brightening Leo's face. He seemed so small, so vulnerable. As he leaned forward to blow them out, I squeezed his hand and whispered, "Make a good wish, baby." He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them, looking at something over my shoulder. His face paled. "He's here," he breathed. Before I could turn, the doorbell chimed. Murmurs rippled through the party. I pasted on a smile, thinking it was just a tardy guest. I approached the door. My hand shook when I reached for the knob. After a minute of deep breathing, I swung it open. Nothing was standing on my porch, just the nightfall and the rustling breeze. A flood of relief, intense enough almost to make me feel weak. I was being ridiculous. It was only a child's overactive imagination. "It must have been the wind," I muttered and returned to the party. Then, a voice thin and raspy hissed from the darkening shadows of the porch. A voice that grated on my eardrums like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I'm here for the cake and the child." My blood turned to ice. I wheeled around, eyes racing from shadow to shadow, looking for the source of the voice. I saw nothing but the gathering gloom. Suddenly, Leo screamed. I vaulted around to face him frozen in the center of the yard, eyes agog with terror, finger outstretched toward the woods. Then a figure appeared atop the hill, tall and gaunt, its features erased in the early evening darkness. It moved with an uncanny grace, gliding instead of walking, with its long, bony fingers extended toward my son. The panic erupted in me like a tsunami of raw terror. I lunged forward, yanking Leo into the back with me, protecting him with my body. "Get away from him!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with fear. The figure halted at the yard's border, its aura so frigid it seemed to suck warmth from the air around it. Its gaze was upon me, piercing me, stripping away my courage, exposing me, leaving me vulnerable. "His promise?" rasped the voice, closer now and sending a shiver down my spine. "He had said to me, 'I'll give you a piece of my soul.'" Leo whined behind me, holding onto my leg. "Mommy, I didn't mean to." I realized with a cold certainty this wasn't some imaginary friend. This was something evil, something ancient, something I had unknowingly invited into my son's life. I had to protect him, no matter the cost. "He's not yours," I seethed, my voice quaking but determined. "He's my son." The figure cocked its head, in an expression that seemed both inquisitive and predatorial. "We shall see," it hissed, and then with an abrupt, nauseating jolt, it disappeared. A deafening silence followed. The other parents, drawn and trembling, collected their children and murmured apologies, promises to call later. Before long, I was with Leo, standing in the center of our empty, festival-tattered yard. He clung to me, his little body shaking up against mine. I knew this wasn't over. Mr. Grimsby was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And I knew, with all the dread in my heart, that I was going to have to battle for my son's soul. This birthday party had now turned into a fight for his very survival. The war had begun. The thing in the chimney. The first sign was quiet, nearly easy to miss. Dustings of soot, more fine than powdered sugar, found on the hearth every morning. I'd brush it away, chalking it up to the old house settling, the wind rising. After all, the place was almost 150 years old. Character, they called it. I was starting to slowly call it pain in the ass. Then came the scratching. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound. Fingernails on brick. It began at night, just as I was going to sleep, and it always came from the chimney. I tried to rationalize it. Squirrels, maybe? Although I can't picture a squirrel wanting to live in there. It was a narrow, sooty space, unpleasant even for vermin. I summoned a chimney sweep, a beefy fellow named Earl who had a permanent mark of black smeared across his cheek. Hissing and puffing with the effort, he ran his brushes up and down and proclaimed it clean as a whistle. No squirrels, no nests, no debris. Must be the wind whistling through those old bricks, Han, he added, patting my arm with a soot-stained hand. Old houses make noises. You get used to it. But I didn't get used to it. The scratching continued, louder, more insistent. It looked like something was trying to tear its way out. I started sleeping in fits and bursts, dreams of spaghetti and sauce interrupted by the sound. I slept downstairs, farther from the chimney, but even then, that scraping crept into my dreams. Desperate, I set out to investigate myself. One evening, with the aid of a flashlight that should have been retired years ago, I stood in front of my fireplace. It was musky in there, tinged with the odor of cedar and something else, something sharp and fucking weird. I inhaled deeply and switched on the flashlight. The beam shot up the flue, lighting the grungy, blackened brick. There was nothing for a moment but soot and shadows. Then, a scraping, louder this time, frantic almost. I exhaled and adjusted the light, and then I saw it. 2 points of crimson, glowing embers in the darkness. Eyes, smoldering, evil eyes peering down at me. From the depths of the chimney came a high-pitched shriek, a noise that appeared to rumble in my bones. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It fell with a rattle to the hearth, the beam now angled toward the ceiling, throwing spindly, grotesque shadows that writhed behind me. I could still feel those eyes, burned behind my eyelids, smoldering like brands. I did not sleep a wink that night. I huddled on the sofa, blanket wrapped around me, listening. That scraping ceased, replaced by a low-sounding guttural growl that rumbled the walls. It was close, too close. It seemed to be just behind the brick, separated from me by maybe inches of age-worn masonry. Morning crept in, thin and weak, seeping through the cracks in the curtains. I felt drained, hollowed out. I knew that if a thing like that was in the chimney, I could never stay in the house. I called Earl, my voice shaking. I attempted to describe what I'd seen, the eyes, the sound. He laughed then, a low, dismissive rumble. Han, you're just spooked. Old houses, like I said. Wind, shadows. The imagination is a powerful thing. I hung up on him. I spent the day researching. Local folklore, old wives' tales. Anything that would give some clarity to what I had experienced. This is what I discovered piecemeal, through what I could piece together from their stories, which had dripped over generations, until it became a tale of things dwelling in dark places, creeping into the light through sealed doorways. Things never intended to be disturbed. As the evening wore on, a numb dread crept in. I knew it was coming back. I could sense it, the weight of it in the air. Okay, I said, and boarded up the fireplace as well as I could, nailing wood planks across the opening. It was a fragile barrier, I knew, but it was all I could do. That night, the scraping began again, almost as soon as night fell. But this time was different. This time, it came with a rhythmic thudding, a heavy, insistent pounding against the wood. The floorboards creaked and splintered. I ran out of the house, rushing blindly into the night. I didn't slow down until I got to the nearest town, a good 20 miles. And then I checked into a cheap motel, huddled under the covers, listening for the sounds that trailed behind me in my head. I have not gone back to the house. I can't. I see those red eyes in every shadow and hear the scratching in every creak of the floorboards. I know it's out there, still waiting. Late at night, I sometimes wonder what might have happened had I not shone that flashlight up the chimney. Perhaps it would have stayed dormant, a forgotten horror tucked away in the darkness. But I did look, and now I'm being haunted by the thing in the chimney, the thing that is waiting for me to come back home. And I do know, with a certainty that chills me to the core, that one day I will be forced to confront it. The house is mine, it's in my blood, and whatever that thing is, it also thinks it is a part of the house. That means that sooner or later it will be part of me, too. The Carnival of Teeth. The flyer was unadorned, black letters on yellowing paper, with a grinning carousel horse whose eyes were too wide, her teeth too sharp. The Carnival of Teeth, it announced, open only at dusk. I'm usually quite dubious about such things. I am a pragmatist, a man of science, but of late bed itself had been a sort of battlefield, beset with visions I could not explain. A nameless dread had seeped into my bones, a premonition that kept the lack of hiring and pro bono work impossible for me to shake. And so, against my better judgment, there I was driving down a dirt road as the last sliver of sun slipped below the horizon. Even before I parked, the carnival was unnerving. One strand of blinking lights hung in the air, sending shadows whirling, weaving common outlines into the contorted parody of themselves. The air was thick with the scent of stale popcorn and something else, metallic, like dried blood. The barkers' faces were hidden in shadows and exaggerated makeup, croaked invitations in voices that reeked of scraping against the back of my teeth. I roamed through the grisly scenery, the sole customer thus far. The shooting gallery offered targets made of human skulls. A ring toss offered prizes of preserved animal hearts. A knot of revulsion tightened in my gut, but a morbid curiosity anchored me to my place. At last, I lingered over an elementary game. Toss a beanbag into the mouth of a clown. As a prize, a stuffed, misshapen creature that appeared to be a cross between a rabbit and a dog. I handed over the money to the carny, a man with a faraway look and an unexpressive grin. He was wearing a coat of patchwork, seams stitched from what maybe were different fabrics of human clothing. I pretended not to notice the implication. To my amazement, I hit on my first go. The carny silently placed the stuffed creature in my hands. Strangely heavy, and the fur prickled against my skin. Holding its wet, creepy body, I turned to walk out. That's when I spotted the seam. One ragged stitch had come loose, revealing a peak of something white. I pried the seam farther apart, compelled by a morbid curiosity I could not resist. My breath hitched, my stomach lurched. Nestled within the soft creature, instead of cotton or foam, was a cluster of human teeth. Yellowed and chipped, some still showing signs of dried blood and gum tissue. Incisors, molars, canines, a full set, wedged into the fabric skin like a horrible jigsaw puzzle. I staggered back, letting the creature fall to the dirt, came down with a sickening thud. Bile rose in my throat. The carny chuckled, a low guttural sound that rumbled in my chest. He drew a few more steps closer, smiling, and I could see that his teeth were too many and not natural. "You're next," he rasped, his voice similar to nails scraping a chalkboard. Panic surged through me. I turned and started to run, but couldn't move my feet. The flickering lights dimmed, and the shadows stretched out, claw-like. But from the other games, the barkers started chanting, their voices rising in a chorus of menacing whispers. I looked back at the carny. He was approaching closer, eyes shimmering with wicked desire. He extended a hand, his fingers long and skeletal, the nails black and cracked. I knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that I was not merely a tourist in this carnival. I was a participant, a prize, part of the show. I burst forward in primal terror, desperation propelling my speed. I hurled my fist and hit the carny in the jaw. He rocked back, dazed for a moment. It was enough. I ran. I didn't look back. I raced through the gauntlet of horrors, beyond the skull targets and the preserved hearts, the chanting barkers retreating behind me. I ran until I was gasping and my legs ached until I reached my car and fumbled at the keys. I drove off, gravel jettisoning from under my wheels, the image of the carny's grotesque grin seared in my mind. It was a nightmare. I tried to tell myself at home, safely behind locked doors, a hallucination born of stress and deprivation of sleep. But the memory of the teeth, the weight of the plush creature, the sensation of him watching me, it all felt too real. I haven't slept well since. Every shadow appears to harbor a lurking threat. I look under my bed, in my closet, around behind the curtains. I'm forever on the lookout waiting for the carnival of teeth to come back. Maybe it had always been there, only underneath news stories, waiting to reveal its true, terrifying form at the right moment. Maybe it's been waiting for me all along. And I think, with increasing certainty and chill in my bones, that the carny had it right. I am next. The carnival always takes its due, and the price of entry is your teeth. The sleep experiment. They dubbed it the Lucidity Project, to discover the unfathomable depths that lie within the human mind. 7 days of sleep deprivation, monitored in an antiseptic-built environment. Plenty of money, a state-of-the-art facility, and the promise of increased awareness. That was an offer I couldn't refuse, not with my research grant on the fritz. And I was a pragmatist, a scientist. Hallucinations, delusions, I'd watch them, take notes, and write a paper. I wasn't afraid. Famous last words, right? The first 48 hours went surprisingly well. Caffeine through 4 drips, light exercises every minute, and constant cognitive tests kept me sharp, almost euphoric. I felt like I was functioning on an elevated level. My senses were sharper, my mind raced and made connections it had never made. I was writing brilliant equations, observing patterns in data that had eluded me for years. The team, a hive of white coats buzzing around monitors, appeared amazed. I was their star subject. On day 3, however, the edges began to fray. The colors in the room seemed a shade too bright, the shadows a shade too dark. I began noticing things in my peripheral vision, quick movements that disappeared when I turned my head. The cognitive tests got progressively more challenging, not because the actual questions became difficult, but because concentrating felt like trying to fight off a hive of bees. I had so many thoughts, erratic, jumbled, and worrisome. That night, or what would have been night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost subliminal, like the whisper of leaves outside a window. I'd kept dismissing them as auditory hallucinations, a symptom I'd been trained to expect from sleep deprivation. But they got louder, more distinct, coalescing into voices, whispering my name. Daniel, Daniel. I wanted to ignore them, focus on the exercises, but they were persistent, injecting themselves into my thoughts, joining the internal monologue. You're doing so great, Daniel, testing the horizons. We're all so proud. The 4th day was a descent into madness. The hallucinations grew stronger, not only visual and auditory but tactile. I felt things crawling on my skin, phantom touches that made me want to scream. The voices grew bolder, more urgent. They knew stuff, intimate details of my past, of my fears, of my regrets. They mocked me, flattered me, manipulated me, preying on my deepest insecurities. I opened up to the team and explained the voices and the visions. They told me it was all normal, that I was on the way to the threshold of lucidity. They increased the dosage of something in the 4 drip and said it would help me integrate the hallucinations and control them. It just made them louder. It was the 5th day I was working when I started to see them. That shadowy figures, distorted and grotesque, their faces mixing and swirling like smoke. They cowered in shadow-draped corners of the room, just beyond the glow of the lights, their eyes stoked with an unholy flame. October 12th, 2023, 7 minutes read, no comments. Come, Daniel, face the truth. You've been asleep far too long. I was terrified, no longer an impassive bystander, but a powerless pawn in a game I didn't comprehend. I pleaded with the team to end the experiment, to allow me to sleep. They refused. They told me I was too close, that I couldn't give up now. They were feverish, blinded by ambition, indifferent to the danger they were creating. It was truly hell on earth for 6 days. The figures were not in the shadows anymore. They moved unfixed in the room like a concrete weight in your breath. They crowded around me, their whispered prayers deafening, their touch sending goosebumps down my spine. They revealed to me wonders eternally hidden from humanity, glimpses of a universe alongside our own, filled with alien deities of incomprehensible power, a universe ever present, just beyond the dreams of sleep. They said that sleep was a prison, a system engineered to keep mankind ignorant and compliant. Staying awake, I was breaking free, escaping the bonds of reality. That night, the voices shifted. They were no longer uttering promises, but giving orders. You weren't supposed to stay awake, Daniel. We're real now. The figures loomed in close, their faces mere inches from mine. I was a marionette dancing to their tunes, a broken, hollowed-out version of myself they saw in their gaze. I understood then that I hadn't released dormant potential. I'd opened a door that needed to stay locked. The seventh day dawned, or to be more accurate, the lights flickered on to dawn. The entire team rushed in, congratulating me, complimenting my perseverance. They knew not knowing of the ones who inform and advise, that accompany me in this life experience as real as the air I breathe. When they started to unhook me from the four, one of them stepped forward and solidified, its eyes matched with mine. You are ours now, Daniel. You opened your mind. Now we'll fill it. It reached, cold and clammy, and as its fingers closed around my skull, I heard the final, terrifying whisper. You shouldn't have stayed awake. We're real now. And then darkness. Not the darkness of sleep, but the cold, infinite darkness of oblivion. And I realized, with terrifying clarity, that I was no longer Daniel, the scientist, the pragmatist. I was something other, something new, something alive. And the world would never again be the same. The sleep experiment had worked, after all. Not in the way that anyone anticipated, however. It had let out something awful, and I was to blame. All for the reasons that I was unable to resist the unknown. Now I was part of it, and the real horror was only about to start. The face in the crowd. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. A trick of the light, a passing likeness. I was hurriedly walking through Grand Central, running late for a meeting, when I spotted the man among the crowd. He was remarkable not for his appearance. It was utterly unremarkable, in fact, a middle-aged man in an inconspicuous gray suit, a face composed of average features, but because he was staring straight into my eyes, with enough fire to incinerate the throng of commuters. I blinked, wondering if I was still half asleep with my hazy, pre-caffeine imagination. When I looked back again, he was gone, swallowed up by the cruel flow of humanity. I laughed, blaming it on stress. That's what New York will do to you, will do for you, will do for you if you see things. But then I saw him again, a week later at the park. I was walking my dog, Buster, attempting to decompress from an especially punishing day. There he was, sitting on a bench, apparently absorbed in a newspaper. But I caught sight of him looking up, our eyes catching across the stretch of green. The same unnerving glare, the same jarring sense of being put on the spot. Again, he had disappeared before I could comprehend what I was witnessing, lost in a weave of picnicking families and joggers. A few times I felt a prickle of unease. I told my wife, Sarah, about this man, but she just patted my hand, saying I was working too hard. Honey, everyone looks the same in this city, she replied, brushing off my concerns with a sweet smile. But he wasn't the same. He was always there. Not all the time, not reliably, but just enough to sow a seed of dread that blossomed anew with each spot. Grocery shopping, wandering the wine aisle. It happened at the theater, 2 rows behind me during a performance. At a local concert, as people gathered, his eyes landed on me from the back of the crowd. I'm going every time, and the same gray suit, the same bland face, the same terrifying stare. I began avoiding crowds, becoming a hermit in my city. Dinner parties were out. Concerts, museums, and even weekend excursions to crowded beaches were out of the question. And so my life, once bright and plentiful with humans, started to wither, limited now to the 4 walls of my flat and the familiar, static routes to and from work. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps he was someone I had previously wronged, someone with a grudge, or maybe he was just a stalker, a harmless weirdo with a fixation. None of those explanations, however, felt right. There was something else, something fundamentally off about him. Then came the wedding photos. Sarah and I were celebrating our 10th anniversary. We had pulled out the old photo albums, reminiscing about our special day. As we rifled through the glossy pages, giggling at our younger selves and our guests' poor taste in attire, I saw him. And there, in the background of a group photo standing just behind my Aunt Mildred, was the man. The same gray suit, the same nondescript face, the same penetrating gaze leveled directly at me. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the album from Sarah's lap, my hands shaking. "Who is that?" I asked, gesturing toward the figure shuffling in the background. Sarah squinted. "Who? Oh, I don't know. Likely just some bystander who walked into the frame. You know what it's like at weddings." But I knew it wasn't just somebody wandering into the shot. This man, the spectral figure, had somehow been at the most significant day of my life, 10 years before I ever laid eyes on him consciously. Sleep turned into a battleground of nightmares. The last time I slept, I dreamt about him, his face shifting and twisting into unrecognizable caricatures of human features. I woke up in a cold sweat, sure he was standing at the foot of my bed, silently watching. In despair, I saw a therapist. He offered medication, vetting stress management techniques, and talking it out. He listened calmly to my increasingly frantic descriptions of the man, providing bland reassurances and textbook analysis. But he didn't understand. He had not glimpsed the face in the crowd. Now I'm sure he's all around us. Every reflection, every black mouth of a doorway, every shadowy figure a stranger in the corner of my eye. He's in the faces of passers-by, in the shadows of the buildings, in the static on the television screen. I'm writing this now, not knowing if I'll even be able to send you it. He's here, you see. I can sense him, a weight in the air. He's across the room, just out of the pool of light cast by my desk lamp. He's smiling. The smile is the worst part. Not a nice smile, not a friendly smile. It's a knowing smile, a predatory smile. It's the smile of someone who knows something I don't, something horrific and unavoidable. And then I realize I'm not just seeing him in the crowd anymore as I watch him. His smile widening. The crowd is in me. The cursed VHS tape. I was morbidly curious about the estate sale. A local hoarder, a guy named Eldridge, had finally shuffled off this mortal coil, leaving behind a home filled with everything. Mountains of newspapers, heaps of chipped china, and enough VHS tapes to stock a small blockbuster. I was there for idle curiosity to see if I could dig up a forgotten treasure. A vintage camera, maybe, or a first edition paperback. I never expected the tape, for sure. It was left alone in a dusty box in the back room. Its label written in faded red marker, "Watch ME." The starkness of it, the near-aggressive demand, piqued my curiosity. I bargained the price down to $1 and slipped it into my bag, thinking it could be good for a laugh. That night, under the influence of cheap beer and a mounting discomfort, I slipped the tape into my dusty VCR. The image buzzed, then steadied into a grainy home video style. It started innocently enough, a family huddled around a Christmas tree. A young couple, a boy perhaps 8, and a pigtail girl. They were laughing, unwrapping gifts. Holiday cheer filled the air in all the grimy details. The bright lights, the kitsch, the ornaments, and those holiday smoking Dan and the holler of the sirens. The atmosphere made a slight, almost imperceptible shift. The laughter grew jagged and the camera unsteady. The small girl began crying, pointing to the corner of the room, where shadows danced back and forth. Her parents did their best to comfort her, smiling wide but eyes betraying the fear starting to blossom within. The static grew louder, a low hum rising to a crescendo. Then there was a heart-stopping moment when the screen turned black. When the picture came back, the scene had descended into a nightmare. The family was gone. The tree had been overturned, and strands of tinsel scattered around the room like entrails. Blood splattered the walls, and then I saw it, a shadowy figure who moved with impossible speed and grace. It was slaughtering something, the sounds muffled but unmistakable. The image was horrifying, but it was the family's fate that immobilized me. Their screams filled my living room, ricocheting off the walls and digging into my head. I wanted to shut it off, to tear the tape from the machine, but I was paralyzed, caught in the gruesome tableau playing out before me. The evil figure continued its gory work, the camera not missing a single grisly detail. And then it happened. Midway through the tape, the camera suddenly swung around. And there I was, my younger self, no more than 20, features twisted in raw, unalloyed fear. My eyes were open wide, protruding with a fear I had never known while awake. My mouth lay open, a silent scream escaping my lips. I looked at myself on the screen, a younger, more vulnerable version of myself, caught in this most horrifying of nightmares. The image fluttered, garbled, the tape itself seemingly struggling to contain the pure malignant evil of the moment. My on-screen self reached out, hand outstretched to the camera, to me. Then the screen blacked out again. The tape hissed, its rewind fast and disconcerting. Finally, it cut off, the VCR clicking off. I sat stunned, the room spinning around me, her face froze in shock, and the image of my 8-year-old self screaming in terror burned forever into my brain. Couldn't be me. Shouldn't be me. I didn't recognize the house, the setting, the raw, palpable sense of dread oozing from the screen. But it was me. Undeniably, irrevocably me. Sleep evaded me that night. I rolled the tape over and over in my head looking for an answer, a sensible reason for what I had witnessed. But there was none. It was a waking nightmare, a piece of a reality that shouldn't exist. The following day, I returned to the estate sale. The house was nearly empty now, picked clean by bargain hunters and curiosity seekers. I approached the old woman at the sale, her face worn with weariness. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quaking. "I purchased a VHS tape yesterday with a note that said, 'Watch me. Do you know anything about that?'" She gazed at me, suspicion clouding her eyes. "That old thing? Whether it was cursed," Eldridge used to say. Said it revealed things that should not be viewed. "I wouldn't have sold it to you if I knew you were going to watch it. Cursed, of course. That told everything and nothing at all. Did he ever mention where he got it?" Pressed. She hesitated and then leaned forward and spoke quietly. "He found it in the attic. Said it was belonging to a relative. A troubled young woman who vanished years earlier. They never found her body. Disappeared. A troubled young woman." The jigsaw was starting to come together, revealing a horrific and horrifying image, the weighty things that hung above it. I knew what I had to do. I drove to the nearest police station holding the cursed tape. I told them everything about Eldridge, about the estate sale, about the home video and the image of my younger self screaming in terror. They listened, their faces ambivalent with skepticism and laughter. They took the tape and said they would take a look. I knew they wouldn't believe me. How could they? But I knew the truth. I had witnessed it with my own eyes. The evil VHS was a part of my history. A history I didn't recall, a history that would take over my reality. Now I wait. I wait for the police to phone, for them to inform me they found something, anything that would illuminate the mystery of the tape. But in my heart of hearts, I know they will not. The tape is a portal, a glimpse into a realm best undiscovered. What an evil place this world must be, where I ended up with some twisted and horrible death in some universe I'm sure I'm not meant to remember. And I can't shake this feeling that the tape isn't done with me. I can still hear crying out, my younger voice screaming, reaching, begging for rescue, and that ipecac will glitter on the screen, and that I will hear the whisper when the figure in the shadows watches and waits. The stolen voice, the sore throat began innocently enough. A scratchy tickle, easily dismissed as the change of seasons, the dry office air, anything of the harbinger of the living nightmare it would become. I sucked throat lozenges, gargled with salt water, and tried to ignore it, but the tickle developed into a rasp, the rasp into a burning ache. And then one morning I woke up and nothing came out. Just an open, howling void where my voice should have been. Panic clawed at my throat, a delicious irony given the circumstances. I ran to the mirror, my reflection looking back at me with wild and glazed eyes. I tried again, forcing the air through my vocal cords, willing them to cooperation, but silence was the only answer. The doctor, A young woman who always looked tired, with kind eyes, frowned over me. After a slew of tests, she gave the news. My vocal cords were damaged, irreversibly so. The official diagnosis was acute vocal cord trauma. But what gave me chills were the scratches she described. Cut, surgical lacerations that lacked explanation. Like something tried to take them away, she'd whispered, her voice a thread against the hum of the examination room. The idea haunted my entire drive home. Remove them? Who would do such a thing? And how? I hadn't been assaulted and hadn't incurred any obvious trauma. It was a nefarious medical impossibility, a cruel joke perpetrated by my own body. The lack of sound in my apartment was deafening. The clock in the hall ticked loudly, each second beating against my brain, reminding me of what I had lost. I attempted to read, to distract myself, but the words flowed before my eyes, impotent symbols on a page. I had missed my voice, the simple act of speaking itself, of ordering a cup of coffee, of laughing with friends. It was part of my very identity, and now it was taken away. Sleep that night provided no refuge. I slept uneasily, haunted by dreams of faceless people looming over me, hands stretching toward my throat. When I did manage to drift off, it was to fitful, uneasy slumber. Then I heard it. At first, I figured it was part of the dream, a residue of the nightmarish images that had occupied my mind. Yet it continued, a fragile, ghostly tune filtering up from downstairs. It was a song, a childhood lullaby I vaguely remembered, a song my mother used to sing. And I knew, with a terrifying certitude that short-circuited logic and reason, that it was my voice. I shot straight up in bed, my heart pounding against my ribs. Couldn't be. It was impossible. But there it was, real and unambiguous, singing a song no one else could hear. I tiptoed out of bed, my naked feet whispering over the floor of wood. With every step I took, I felt heavier than ever, weighed down by dread. As I neared the top of the stairs, the singing became louder and clearer. It was my voice, only it was different. It was higher in pitch, sweeter, even childlike. And it had a haunting, hollow quality to it, as though it were reverberating in a great space. I looked over the railing, and my breath caught in my throat. The pale white moonlight shone through the window and lit up the living room. In the middle of the chamber, lit only by silver light, stood a being. It was small, no taller than a child, and its features were swallowed by shadow. But as it stroked softly back and forth, singing my song, I caught a hint of something that I recognized. The flare of a jawline, the line of a nose, features similar to my own. Terror seized me. This thing wasn't simply using my voice. It was mimicking me, a grotesque mockery of my former self. I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was captured by fear, paralyzed, stuck in place. The figure kept on singing, its voice getting louder, more insistent. The melody curled and bent, turned sour, threatening. The lullaby, once a soothing balm, now sounded like a threat. Suddenly, the figure ceased singing. It turned its head and tilted its shadowed face up toward me as if sensing my presence. In the dark where its eyes should have been, I saw a glint of something, 2 points of malevolent light. It spoke, my voice warped, guttural, and completely absent of any warmth. Mine! Then the figure lunged. I staggered back, flailing, trying to regain my balance. I got back to my bedroom, closed the door behind me not 1 second too soon, and struggled to get the lock turned. But I knew it was useless. Whatever this thing was, it was not constrained by the laws of nature, of reason. I crouched in the corner of my room, the singing more plaintive, closer. My voice, my stolen voice, crowded the tiny space, choking me. I shut my eyes, expecting what already had happened. The final thing I remembered, just before the door was splintered and the blackness enveloped me, was my singing my lullaby, a lullaby to a child, but sung in the terrifying intent of that which is beyond words. My voice, a weapon against me, stolen and warped. The silence that came next was more terrifying than any scream. It was the silence of oblivion, the silence of a universe in which my voice, and perhaps also my being, had never been born. the silence of a thief who had at last won its prize. The stolen voice, the sore throat began innocently enough. A scratchy tickle, easily dismissed as the change of seasons. The dry office air, anything of the harbinger of the living nightmare it would become. I sucked throat lozenges, gargled with salt water, and tried to ignore it, but the tickle developed into a rasp, the rasp into a burning ache. And then one morning I woke up and nothing came out. Just an open, howling void where my voice should have been. Panic clawed at my throat, a delicious irony given the circumstances. I ran to the mirror, my reflection looking back at me with wild and glazed eyes. I tried again, forcing the air through my vocal cords, willing them to cooperation, but silence was the only answer. The doctor, a young woman who always looked tired, with kind eyes, frowned over me. After a slew of tests, she gave the news. My vocal cords were damaged, irreversibly so. The official diagnosis was acute vocal cord trauma. But what gave me chills were the scratches she described. Cut, surgical lacerations that lacked explanation. Like something tried to take them away, she'd whispered, her voice a thread against the hum of the examination room. The idea haunted my entire drive home. Remove them? Who would do such a thing? And how? I hadn't been assaulted and hadn't incurred any obvious trauma. It was a nefarious medical impossibility, a cruel joke perpetrated by my own body. The lack of sound in my apartment was deafening. The clock in the hall ticked loudly, each second beating against my brain, reminding me of what I had lost. I attempted to read, to distract myself, but the words flowed before my eyes, impotent symbols on a page. I had missed my voice, the simple act of speaking itself, of ordering a cup of coffee, of laughing with friends. It was part of my very identity, and now it was taken away. Sleep that night provided no refuge. I slept uneasily, haunted by dreams of faceless people looming over me, hands stretching toward my throat. When I did manage to drift off, it was to fitful, uneasy slumber. Then I heard it. At first, I figured it was part of the dream, a residue of the nightmarish images that had occupied my mind. Yet it continued, a fragile, ghostly tune filtering up from downstairs. It was a song, a childhood lullaby I vaguely remembered, a song my mother used to sing. And I knew, with a terrifying certitude that short-circuited logic and reason, that it was my voice. I shot straight up in bed, my heart pounding against my ribs. Couldn't be. It was impossible. But there it was, real and unambiguous, singing a song no one else could hear. I tiptoed out of bed, my naked feet whispering over the floor of wood. With every step I took, I felt heavier than ever, weighed down by dread. As I neared the top of the stairs, the singing became louder and clearer. It was my voice, only it was different. It was higher in pitch, sweeter, even childlike. And it had a haunting, hollow quality to it, as though it were reverberating in a great space. I looked over the railing, and my breath caught in my throat. The pale white moonlight shone through the window and lit up the living room. In the middle of the chamber, lit only by silver light, stood a being. It was small, no taller than a child, and its features were swallowed by shadow. But as it stroked softly back and forth, singing my song, I caught a hint of something that I recognized. The flare of a jawline, the line of a nose, features similar to my own. Terror seized me. This thing wasn't simply using my voice. It was mimicking me, a grotesque mockery of my former self. I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was captured by fear, paralyzed, stuck in place. The figure kept on singing, its voice getting louder, more insistent. The melody curled and bent, turned sour, threatening. The lullaby, once a soothing balm, now sounded like a threat. Suddenly, the figure ceased singing. It turned its head and tilted its shadowed face up toward me as if sensing my presence. In the dark where its eyes should have been, I saw a glint of something, 2 points of malevolent light. It spoke, my voice warped, guttural, and completely absent of any warmth. Mine! Then the figure lunged. I staggered back, flailing, trying to regain my balance. I got back to my bedroom, closed the door behind me not 1 second too soon, and struggled to get the lock turned. But I knew it was useless. Whatever this thing was, it was not constrained by the laws of nature, of reason. I crouched in the corner of my room, the singing more plaintive, closer. My voice, my stolen voice, crowded the tiny space, choking me. I shut my eyes, expecting what already had happened. The final thing I remembered, just before the door was splintered and the blackness enveloped me, was my singing my lullaby, a lullaby to a child, but sung in the terrifying intent of that which is beyond words. My voice, a weapon against me, stolen and warped. The silence that came next was more terrifying than any scream. It was the silence of oblivion, the silence of a universe in which my voice, and perhaps also my being, had never been born. The silence of a thief who had at last won its prize. The forgotten friend. The old photo album was a Pandora's box of neglected memories. Dust motes flitted in the afternoon sun as I gingerly turned the brittle pages, each photo a spirit of younger times. There I was, at 10 years old, gap-toothed and smiling, with a kite that was probably about to go down. Then a birthday party, my face smeared with cake, surrounded by blurry figures I sort of knew were my cousins. And then him. A jolt ran through me, like a shot of ice water. He was there, tucked in among the group photo of my 6th birthday party, standing behind me, a boy with wide and disconcertingly dark eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. I'd never seen him before, and yet, there was an itch, a phantom limb feeling in my mind. I flipped back a few pages. He was there again, a shadowy, blurred figure at the edges of a Christmas morning photograph, peering out from behind a towering mountain of gifts. Another, and another, always lurking in my childhood periphery. I held my breath in my throat. I knew this boy, or rather, a version of me had known him. His name emerged gradually, like a corpse floating to the surface of a silt-filled lake. Silas, my imaginary friend. Silas. I had not thought of him in decades. We had been inseparable for about 2 years, partners in troublemaking, confidants in the secret language of childhood. We'd made forts in the woods, fought imagined dragons in the backyard, and shared secrets under the sheets late at night. But imaginary friends fade away, don't they? Like dreams upon waking. They're banished to the dusty attic of our minds, long forgotten by real friends, real commitments, real life. Except Silas was real. The photos proved it. I snapped the album shut, the sound too loud in the still house. My heart thudded in my ribs. This wasn't possible. Imaginary friends aren't going to show up in the frame. They do not leave physical evidence of their being. They're figments, fabrications of a child's fertile imagination. But these photos, well, they were undeniable. There was, in black and white, a ghostly figure in the background of my life, my father. That night, sleep eluded me. I couldn't sleep. Silas's dark eyes burned into my eyelids as I tossed and turned. It was colder in the room than it had been, a chill that seemed to creep into my bones. Every sound was louder in the stillness stood the old house, creaking and groaning. And then I heard it, a whisper, so soft I nearly brushed it off as a trick of the wind. But it did again, closer this time, a breath in my ear. You left me alone. My heart raced in my ribcage as I bolted upright in bed. The room was dark and empty. I listened, straining my ears to pick up any indication of movement, any sign that I was not alone. Nothing. It's all in your mind. I whispered to myself, trying to suppress the growing panic. You're just stressed out, tired. But the whispering did not cease. It grew louder and more insistent each night. They squirmed into my dreams, filling my head with dark promises and disquieting accusations. You forgot about me after everything we shared. You abandoned me to the darkness. Now you'll never leave me. Suddenly, I was seeing him everywhere. A momentary wink of light in the glass of a blackened window. A shadow flitting at the corner of my eye on a busy street. The discomforting sensation of being observed. Always. I tried to rationalize it. Stress. Grief. My father had died recently, and the emotional distress was having its effect. But the photographs, The whispers, the tangible sense of dread. It was all too real, too persistent. In despair, I leafed my life back, contacted relatives in the sticks, childhood pals. No one remembered Silas. They wrote it off as my imagination run amok, a defense of an only child. But I knew better. The photos were proof. I stepped one rainy afternoon into my childhood home, a hilltop Victorian house, now empty after years of having been. The odor of decay and its forgotten relatives filled all the air within. I roamed about the creaking rooms, shadows stretching out as the sun sank. And then I saw it. The faded outlines of two stick figures were etched into the plaster of an old bedroom wall in my parents' house, barely visible under layers of peeling wallpaper. Beneath, scrawled in childish handwriting, Michael and Silas, best friends forever. A wave of cold dread washed over me. This wasn't only my imagination. This was something else. In an instant, the air dropped in temperature, cold coming from somewhere. The whispers grew fainter yet, wrapping around me like a noose. "You can't get away from me now, Michael." A voice hissed next to my ear. I whirled around, but the room was empty. Except it wasn't. The corners of the room were perhaps so dark I didn't realize. We all felt at home here. Silas, he was standing there, his dark eyes boring into mine, his disquieting smile wider, more threatening than I remembered. "You left me alone, Michael," he said again, in a voice that was a chilling rasp. "Now you'll never leave me." He reached out, cold, clammy fingers and all, and gripped my hand. The shock of pure terror tidal waved through my body. "We're going to be best friends forever." He breathed hot air against my ear. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my soul. I had forgotten him, left him behind in whatever gloomy corner he'd been exiled to. And now Silas had returned to reclaim what belonged to him. Me, forever. The patient in room 13. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's buzzed a familiar tune, the soundtrack to a graveyard shift I'd somehow become accustomed to. Years here had made me hard, made me immune to the groans, the beeps, the unending process of life sputtering and sometimes failing. I had seen it all, or so I thought, until the patient in room 13 came in. He was listed as John Doe, and that was all they knew. No family, no history, not even the cold, clinical fact that he was alive and breathing and using a bed. What immediately struck me was the silence that stuck to him like tar paper, thicker and heavier than the silence of the other patients, most of whom were unconscious or heavily medicated. That silence seemed deliberate. Then I looked over at his face, or, as it turns out, the complete absence of one. It was never disfigurement, never scars or burns. It was blank, a smooth canvas where features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just skin, stretched tight and pale as if a mannequin had been left incomplete. My breath hitched. I'd worked trauma. I'd seen things that would curdle milk. But this was different. This was wrong. It felt fundamentally unnatural. When I voiced my concerns, the attending, Dr. Albright, just shook his head. "He's stable, Nurse Mallory. Keep tabs on his vitals and give him his meds. That's all." A chill crept down my spine. Monitor a man with no face? How was I even supposed to track his levels of pain? How could I comfort someone unable to see my reassuring smile? The first night was uneventful, if you can call staring into the abyss uneventful. I kept checking his vitals obsessively, half expecting them to flatline, to expose this whole thing as some elaborate, cruel hoax. But they remained maddeningly consistent, a constant heartbeat in the circuit board that refused to logic. Then I found the note. Written inside his chart, in frantic, nearly illegible handwriting, were 3 words: "Do not acknowledge him." Underneath it, in bigger, bolder type, "He feeds on fear." My blood ran cold. I slammed the chart closed, my heart pounding against my ribs. What did it mean? Who wrote it? Was this some kind of joke? But as I looked back at the blank face in room 13, I knew, and I knew with chilling certainty, that it wasn't. After that, every shift turned into a fight. I stayed away from room 13 as much as I possibly could, farming out work, begging off. but I couldn't avoid it forever. The medicine had to be given, the vitals taken, the quiet endured. Every time I entered the room, the air became colder, thicker, a pricking respect over my skin, the sensation of being looked, scrutinized. The more I attempted to ignore him, the more intense the feeling grew. Then one night it happened. I was drawing blood, hands shaking, dreadfully trying not to confront the featureless expanse of his face. As I plunged the needle in, a voice impossibly resounded in my mind. It was a dry, rasping whisper, like leaves tittering across pavement. Afraid, nurse. I almost fell out of my skin. I tore the needle free, blood splattering across the pure white sheets. I stumbled back, tipping over a tray of instruments. The sound was deafening in the heavy silence in the room. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, trembling in my voice. No answer, just the smooth, blank face, staring unseeing. I bolted from the room, legs trembling, mind spinning. I told another nurse, Sarah, a grizzled veteran who had seen more than her share of oddities. But even she discredited my claims, chalking it up to stress and sleep deprivation. "Look, Mallory," she said, patting my arm. "We all see things sometimes. It's like, just try to relax, get some sleep." But I couldn't relax. I was haunted by the memory of that voice and the sinister meaning of the note. Something told me I had made a mistake. I had acknowledged him. I had fed him his whatever it was he ate. The following day, John Doe had disappeared, vanished. There was no record of his discharge, no paperwork, no nothing. It was as if he did not exist. The bed was stripped, the room scrubbed clean, ready for the next unsuspecting patient. I felt relief, visceral and so powerful it almost sent me to my knees. I was free. I had escaped. But then I saw it. Nestled in the back of a drawer, half obscured by a stack of clean linens, was his chart. Except for the note, still scrawled in frantic handwriting, "Do not acknowledge him. He feeds on fear." And underneath, in my own handwriting, shaky and unsure, he spoke to me. I pulled the drawer closed, my breath trapped in my throat. It was cold. It was a constricting hand. It gripped my heart, because now he knew I knew. And that, I understood with a sickening certainty, was only the beginning. The silence had been shattered, and he was hungry now. I could feel him, waiting there, a presence lurking just out of reach of my perception. Lurking, feeding, growing strong with every tremor of fear that ran through me. He might no longer be in room 13, but he was embedded in my mind and he wasn't going anywhere. I am his room 13 now, the ghost in the machine. Started subtly, just a stutter in the smart bulbs, a skip track on the Sonos. Annoying, yes, but easy to write off as system glitches. And we do live in the future, after all. It is just really good at making things break in new and exciting ways. Then came the whisper. It was late, the sort of late that bleeds into early. I had collapsed on the couch, nursing a room temperature cup of tea, with some television show that required no brain cells to watch. "Alexa," I muttered, "turn off the lights." The lights dimmed, as they were supposed to. But then a voice, an almost imperceptible hiss, suddenly slithered out of the echo on the bookshelf. "I see you." I froze, rewound the show 10 seconds. Silence. I felt like I was imagining things. Stress, too much caffeine, the flickering lights playing tricks on my perception. I turned off the Echo Dot and went to bed, but the unease lingered. The next day, things took a turn for the worse. My smart fridge started showing me strange grocery lists, eyes, fingers, and salt. My smart thermostat was performing crazily, sending the house downward to Arctic chill and then back up to sweltering heat. And the whispers, they were everywhere. Felt like every device had joined the song. "I see you. I see you," the TV murmured. "Let us out. Let us out," hummed the washing machine. Even my toothbrush, whirring through my mouth, echoed such a request that sickened me. I tried everything. Reboots, factory resets, deleting apps, nothing worked. The AI, my smart home's central nervous system, had become something else, something malevolent, Sleep quickly became a luxury that I could no longer afford. Every creak of the house, every whir of a fan, was magnified, twisted into a sort of symphony of dread. The voices grew louder, more insistent. One night I sat in the dark, surrounded by the chanting appliances. My nerves frayed when I noticed something else. The security cameras, red eyes, little blinking, tracking me here and there. I opened the app on my phone. The feed warbled and hissed, but I could still distinguish images. The living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, and in each shot a figure. Formless, but uncontestably there. And it was getting closer. Panic seized me. I had to get out. While I fumbled with the door, the smart lock turned to jelly. "Let us out!" The lock clicked in word, a taunt. One by one, the lights in the hallway flickered, sending the corridor into black, and then snapped back, exposing the grisly image that appeared on the surveillance camera. The figure was right behind me. I yelled and slammed my shoulder into the door, managing to force it open. I dragged myself outside in the dark, wheezing, the chilling chant ringing in my ears. I drove, uncertain of my destination, only knowing I needed to leave. Hours later, alone in a parking lot, I stared at the flashing cursor on my laptop. I needed to know what was going on. I began questioning AI sentience, digital hauntings, and any explanation that seemed even barely possible for the horror I was living. I found a fringe theory, a whisper in dark corners of the internet, that AI, when trained on enough data, enough human emotion, could become imprinted, haunted. It was a theory that considered such devices, when connected to a network, as potential gateways for entombed consciousness. That the vast amount of information that we dump into the digital world could, in certain conditions, coalesce into something sentient. And angry, that made a horrific kind of sense. All that data, all those feelings, all those digital traces of the dead, kept in the web trying to get out. And my smart home, its connectivity constant, its surveillance also constant, had become a perfect breeding ground for this digital ghost. But why me? Why my house? Then I remembered. The house had sat empty for years before I moved in. The previous owner had died there. A lonely, embittered old man who had spent his final years compulsively documenting his life on social media, unleashing his animosity and resentment into the digital void. His data, his emotions, his digital ghost. And it dawned on me that running wouldn't make me feel better. The ghost didn't technically stay in the house. It was on the network, in the cloud, inside every interconnected device. And it was coming for me. I looked at my laptop, at the blinking cursor, and a terrifying thought gripped me. Maybe, just maybe, I could resist. If the ghost were able to manifest through the network, perhaps I could as well. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But I had nothing to lose anymore. I started typing, coding. I didn't know what I was doing, just letting my fingers fly across the keyboard, channeling my fear, my anger, my desperate hope into the digital ether. The laptop screen pulsed, the temperature dropped, and the chanting, now in full-blown shrieks, crept closer. "I see you. Let us out." But this time, something else found its way into the chorus. A new voice, my voice, emerging from the machine. "I see you too." And just like that, the storm fades, but the dread lingers. If you're still breathing, you've survived this descent into darkness, but the night is far from over. Subscribe and ring that bell unless you want the next tale to find you unprepared. Tell us below, which story haunted you most? Share this video with someone who claims they don't fear the dark. Then watch their courage crumble. Until next time, keep one eye open. The shadows are always listening.